In a whirlwind of combat, Helms deftly parried a powerful attack, his sword a blur against the encroaching foe. Beside him, the lovely sorcerer prepared a spell, her expression resolute. Helms assured her he would handle the recovery, prompting her to praise his skill. Yet, a fleeting thought crossed her mind, wondering if their journey truly began at that time. This intense world was part of Lovely Sorcerer, a romance action RPG that the narrator had discovered roughly half a year prior, affectionately known as Love Sorcerer. The game itself was a highly popular title within the eroge industry, boasting increasing sales year after year. Despite being a romance action RPG, it featured a surprisingly robust and rare battle system. Having become completely engrossed in the game, the protagonist had even launched and was now operating a dedicated strategy guide website. He declared his intention to continue updating the site, confident in his ability to exploit game mechanics. He sighed, scrolling through his phone, a familiar thought weighing on him. No matter how meticulously crafted a god-tier game might be, players would inevitably find something to complain about. Slumped in his chair, he reviewed a list of unobtained trophies on his phone, wondering if he was nearing a complete clear of Lovely Sorcerer. He noted that the remaining tasks were merely tedious chores. Suddenly, he snapped, clutching his head and shouting at himself to regain focus. It wasn't over yet. Later, as he lay in bed, his phone displayed notifications about playing Lovely Sorcerer forever, the time reading 3:13. He wished he could truly play the game eternally. His hand stirred on the bed, and he mumbled, wondering what time it was. A moment later, a confused sound escaped him as he slowly began to awaken. While outside, birds soared through the cloudy sky. As his eyes opened, he fixated on the unfamiliar ceiling above him. Ceiling, he murmured, then questioned, ceiling? Huh. A profound sense of disorientation washing over him. He found himself in an unfamiliar, opulent room, his mind racing with the disorienting thought that he might have been kidnapped. He needed to confirm his surroundings, to step outside and verify where he was. He reached for the door, his hand trembling slightly. As he opened the door, a young maid stood before him, her expression one of polite concern. She addressed him as Helms-sama, asking why he was standing by the door. He could only utter Helms in confusion, prompting her to ask if he was referring to himself. The maid, now visibly distressed, questioned if he truly couldn't recall his own name, or if he had forgotten her, Fran, whom he had been speaking with just yesterday. She wondered if an accident had occurred, but quickly dismissed the thought, realizing he was not acting like someone who had suffered a physical injury. She began to weep, lamenting that his memory had suddenly vanished, and pleaded with him, asking if he was not Helms von Lunacelia, the next head of the household. He repeated, Duke's son, in disbelief, while she continued to cry, stating that even a terrible curse would be more believable than this. Overwhelmed by the maid's distress and his own confusion, he clutched his head, a splitting headache beginning to throb. The maid, Fran, asked if he was all right, noting that his head seemed to be splitting apart. He stumbled towards a nearby mirror, his reflection staring back at him. It was a face he recognized, yet it was not his own. A strikingly handsome visage, one that could charm any woman. He touched his cheek, then his hair, confirming the unfamiliar features. He recoiled in shock, realizing he had become an incredibly handsome man. The sudden, overwhelming realization triggered a cascade of fragmented memories. The maid Fran, his family, father, mother, sister, and the castle from the game, Lovely Sorcerer. He cried out in pain as the memories flooded his mind. Amidst the chaos of his thoughts, a clear image of the Lovely Sorcerer game's promotional art flashed before him, featuring the heroine and other characters. He, the game's administrator, could not possibly be mistaken about this world. A slow, dawning smile spread across his face as he touched his cheek again, the pieces of his new reality clicking into place. He understood. High above a sprawling city, a magnificent flying ship soared through the sky, its grand form casting a shadow over the meticulously arranged buildings below. It was a world of fantasy, a place where the impossible was reality, and within it a profound realization dawned. He had been reincarnated. The young man, now in a ruffled shirt and dark trousers, threw his arms wide, a look of utter disbelief and exhilaration on his face. He exclaimed that he had been reincarnated into the world of his favorite game, questioning if such a development, akin to a light novel, was truly possible. As he processed this astonishing fact, a reflection of his former self, a man in a suit, appeared in a nearby mirror, surrounded by mundane real-world objects. He wondered if this was what the god of another world had meant, and if so, it implied his previous life had ended due to overwork. However, a new wave of confusion washed over him. He looked at his reflection, a young man with dark, spiky hair, and realized he could not recall the name of this boy. Helms von Lunacelia? It seemed he had been reincarnated not as a hero, but as a mere background character. Despite the lingering questions, he clenched his fists, resolving not to dwell on the minor details of his reincarnation since it had already occurred. There was no point in searching for answers that wouldn't come. He simply had to accept his new reality. Just then, a maid's voice called out to him, addressing him as Helms-sama. He turned to face the maid, Fran, who was peeking nervously from behind a door, her expression one of apprehension. He remarked that his head still felt strange, but then playfully accused her of looking at him as if he were a completely dangerous person. Fran, startled, could only utter a sharp, spicy, in response. He conceded that her apprehension was understandable, given that it had been a week since his accident, and even if he felt fully recovered, it was difficult to claim there were no lingering after effects. Fran, surprised by his calm acceptance, exclaimed, "Huh? You've accepted it." He simply acknowledged her point, adding that it was indeed true. With a sly smile, he looked at Fran, who was wiping a tear from her eye. He mused that if she chose to misunderstand things on her own, it was actually a benefit to him, and there was no need for him to correct her perception. He then apologized to Fran for making her worry, assuring her that he was fine now, as he had completely regained Helms von Lunacilia's memories. He internally noted that this misunderstanding would be useful going forward. Fran, however, still looked at him with a puzzled expression, observing that he was different than usual. Now dressed in a more formal, dark-toned outfit, though still with his ruffled shirt, he looked at Fran with a confident smirk. He noted that Helms's personality, or rather, his tone, seemed different. Fran, still confused, described him as that kind of person. He playfully insisted that he was always like this, then asked her to give him some space for a bit, explaining that he had regained his memories. He then realized, with a knowing internal thought, that the original Helms was what one would call a Chinibu, a person with delusions of grandeur. He stood flustered as Fran, the maid, bowed deeply before him, reassuring him that she was relieved to see him acting as usual. He internally acknowledged her words, feeling a sense of acceptance. The maid then informed him that his father was currently waiting in the dining room and requested that he change his clothes before heading there. He simply replied with a quiet acknowledgement. Alone in his room, he looked at his reflection, then, with a slight smirk, he dramatically covered one eye with his hand, striking a pose. Moments later, he was flailing on the floor, utterly mortified by his own theatrical display, exclaiming how embarrassing his actions were. He sighed, realizing that he had indeed been reincarnated into the world of the game. Lovely sorcerer. However, he was not the protagonist, but rather Helms von Lunacilia, a minor character he barely knew. He wondered if his dramatic tendencies were merely a symptom of his new identity's Chinibu syndrome. He mused that if he had been reincarnated as the main hero, he would have been envious of the romantic interactions with the heroines, but as a mere mob character, he was free from such obligations. He realized that this freedom allowed him to enjoy this world as he pleased. As he sat at a desk, a thought struck him. If he could check his status like a game protagonist, that would be incredibly useful. Suddenly, a holographic status screen materialized before him, displaying his name, Helms von Lunacilia, along with his gender, age 15, and level 1. It listed his core stats, strength, vitality, agility, and intelligence, all at 10. His magic proficiency showed all elements, fire, water, wind, earth, holy, dark, at beginner level 10. Swordsmanship and academics were both at 30, but his charm was an astonishing 100. He recognized it immediately as a status screen he had often seen in games. He pondered why a mere mob character like him would have a status screen. He wondered if this was a special privilege of reincarnation or if everyone in this world could access their stats. He recalled the goddess who had granted him this new life. Regardless, he considered it lucky to have the status screen as it would greatly aid his future planning. However, he found it strange that his magic aptitude seemed to cover all elements, as the game's lore dictated that individuals typically possessed an affinity for only one. He questioned this unusual breadth of abilities. He, still processing his reincarnation, pondered the implications of his status screen. He recalled the game's protagonist, Atris, who could stand on the stage of the Magic Academy because he was compatible with all attributes. This meant that a proficiency level of 0 did not indicate an inability to use magic. He then realized that if a 0 proficiency didn't mean no magic, then he, too, possessed the same specifications as the game's protagonist. Overwhelmed by this revelation, he urged himself to calm down and try using magic. With a deep breath, he extended his hands, attempting to cast a basic wind attribute spell. A faint sound accompanied his effort. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind erupted from his hands, swirling violently around him, tearing at the papers and objects in the room. The whirlwind intensified, scattering everything in its path. He watched in awe, a wide, delighted grin spreading across his face, exclaiming that it was indeed magic, real magic. As the magical energy swirled, he felt a warm sensation emanating from within his body. He understood now. This was mana, a power that had been impossible to prove or even exist in his previous world. He gazed out at the distant city, a grand castle dominating the landscape, realizing that he had been reborn into a world of endless possibilities. He could start anew and fully enjoy the world of lovely sorcerer. Overjoyed, he clenched his fists and threw his head back, laughing triumphantly. He felt an overwhelming gratitude for everything in this world, for the chance to experience things he could never have in his past life. He thanked the god of games for this incredible opportunity, his words barely coherent from sheer excitement. He threw his arms wide, a radiant smile on his face, declaring his reincarnation into this other world as the absolute best. His new life had truly begun. His joyous outburst was abruptly interrupted as a stern voice called out, "Lord Helms, what are you doing?" Fran, the maid, stood at the doorway, looking exasperated. She immediately declared that the use of magic was strictly forbidden for a while. Helms could only respond with a surprised "yeah" as he realized he was about to be scolded by Fran. Fran, the maid, sternly admonished Helms for using magic indoors, emphasizing its inherent dangers. She explained that he had been reincarnated as a mere background character in the world of Lovely Sorcerer, a romance action RPG, a world where magic truly existed, unlike the advanced civilization of Earth. Despite her lecture, Helms remained captivated by the very existence of magic in this new reality. She continued her scolding, demanding to know if he was truly listening. Fran clarified that, according to Helms's own memories, she served as his personal maid, and his mother also worked as a maid for the esteemed Lunacelia ducal house. She had been reiterating these facts for over 10 minutes. Helms bowed deeply in apology, reflecting on his past self, who had been pure, gentle, and kind to everyone. He admitted that he had used magic for a specific reason, something he felt compelled to confirm. He offered another apology, promising not to repeat his actions, though internally, he confessed his true desire was to delve into the research of magic. Fran accepted his apology, stating she would cease her nagging if he truly understood. However, she added a stern caveat. He must always remember that she never wished to see him harmed. Helms, his face alight with a bright smile, expressed his utmost gratitude to Fran for her genuine concern. As Fran walked away, Helms secretly checked his status screen, noting his impressive charm stat of 100, alongside swordplay LV 30 and academics 30. He mused about becoming handsome and having maxed out stats, wondering why his initial values were so high for a protagonist, even if he was good-looking. Fran announced her intention to clean his room. Helms, appreciating the privilege of being a noble who didn't have to tidy his own space, quickly made his way towards the dining room, where his parents were eagerly awaiting his arrival. He arrived at the dining room, where his father and mother were already seated. He apologized for making them wait, observing his father, a refined and elegant man, who was described as the pure and gentle son Helms. He sat at the dining table, his parents already present. His father greeted him, inquiring if he was all right after the loud noise, to which Helms replied that there was no problem, only a slight confusion in his memories. He internally noted that it had been a week since the incident. His father continued, informing him that he would be attending the Royal First Magic Academy in a month and cautioning him not to overexert himself. Helms reacted with a surprised gasp, realizing that this academy was the main stage of the game, Lovely Sorcerer. He stood from his chair, a determined glint in his eyes. He reflected on his reincarnation, concluding that since he had been reborn into this world, he intended to live his new life to the fullest. His mother then spoke, expressing her regret that she could not stay with him until the entrance ceremony. She explained that while she usually worked far away, she had been staying at home since the incident, but now it was time for her to return. She leaned forward, her expression earnest, asking Helms if he agreed that she needed to remain by his side. Her words carried a strong implication of her desire to protect him. His father, meanwhile, calmly sipped his tea, explaining that he had duties entrusted by the king and that Helms was responsible for managing their territory. This was a glimpse into the weighty responsibilities that governed their noble household. Helms adjusted his hair, a thought dawning on him. His sister, Lakaina, was known as a problem child in his memories. He realized his family was quite eccentric. His mother then apologized for not being able to spend more time with him, but he quickly reassured her that it was perfectly fine. His father, still composed, remarked that it was a lonely thing for a parent when their child grew up, and that Helms, despite his age, had been a source of trouble. He then added that spoiling him too much would be detrimental for a future duke. Helms took a bite of his food, acknowledging his father's words with a quiet affirmation. His father then rose, announcing his intention to head to the garden. He casually mentioned that the blood of the first Duke of Lunacelia, a renowned genius, flowed through Helms. Helms, still seated, mused internally about his father's early morning routine. He considered his father's talent in swordsmanship and his sister's talent in magic. Then a profound realization settled upon him. His own talent, he concluded, encompassed everything. Still contemplating his family's expectations and his own unique abilities, he leaned forward over the table, a confident, almost predatory glint in his eyes. He knew, with an unwavering certainty, that no matter what endeavor he pursued, he was a monstrous talent destined to always stand at the very pinnacle. Helms, now inhabiting the body of a duke's son, reflected on his past life as a game player. He knew his character, Helms von Lunacelia, was not a main character in the game, which was why his name hadn't spread widely. But now, things were different. He wondered about the limits of his own abilities and how far he could truly go in this new world. Perhaps, he mused, it would be interesting to aim for the strongest. He continued his training, leaping and swinging a sword with surprising agility. He possessed both the strongest body and the necessary knowledge, a combination that was far from ordinary for someone living a supposedly normal life. Moments later, Helms stood, wiping sweat from his brow, as Fran, the maid, observed nearby. His trainer, a man with a neatly tied ponytail and a confident demeanor, remarked that Helms had arrived surprisingly early for his training. Helms, still in his training clothes, admitted he had forgotten to change. The trainer instructed him to start from the basics and continue until he was told to stop. Helms readily agreed. He then recalled a wooden sword he had bought previously, a memory that briefly flashed back to his past self, who once swung a frying pan with reckless abandon, thinking of it as destroying household items. Now, with the wooden sword, he began to practice his swings with renewed focus. As he practiced, the trainer watched, marveling at how Helms could swing so well despite it being his first time. Helms himself felt no shift in his center of gravity, executing each movement with surprising stability. He continued to practice various stances and swings, and the trainer soon realized that Helms had already mastered most of the fundamental techniques. Helms commented that his past experiences were being fed back to him, but he still felt far from his father's level. The trainer, however, questioned his modesty, encouraging Helms to have more confidence in himself, declaring that what he was achieving was truly incredible. He realized that, unlike the fixed attack patterns in a game, he could move freely, adapting his actions as needed. This led him to wonder if the same principle applied to magic. The magic he had used that morning, a whirlwind, was not merely a game skill. It was a real wind that could blow objects away. While increasing his intelligence stat would boost his magical attack power that only pertained to raw force. His trainer then posed a crucial question. Could Helms control the wind to assist himself in real combat? He also wondered if there was no cooldown period when using magic in this world. Helms found himself intrigued by the possibilities. The trainer explained that the number of things Helms could accomplish would only increase, and his consciousness would soar. He cautioned Helms to be careful not to get hurt, to which Helms confidently replied that he was ready for anything. With that, their intense sparring session began. He continued his rigorous sword training, clashing blades with his trainer. Each impact sent a jarring shock through his hands, leaving them numb and aching, yet he persisted. Despite the pain, a fierce determination burned in his eyes. He grinned, ready to face even harder training, eager for the challenge. His trainer pressed the attack, declaring that he would steal all of Helms's techniques before he could even enroll in any formal institution. Helms, though surprised, managed to block the relentless assault. Eventually, he collapsed to the ground, utterly exhausted. His body, however, seemed to remember the intricate movements and handling of the sword, a latent skill awakening within him. As he rested, Fran, the maid, approached him with a towel, gently wiping the sweat from his brow. He thanked her, then asked if she could bring him a beginner's magic book. She questioned his request, asking if he truly meant a magic book. He confirmed it, explaining that after swordsmanship, he intended to train in magic. He then playfully wondered if she would clean up the mess he was sure to make in his room. Agreeing to his request, Fran quickly ascended the stairs to retrieve the book. He watched her go, then leaned back, enjoying the clear sky and reflecting that it was a perfect day for training both swordsmanship and magic. Moments later, she returned, presenting him with a magic book. He thanked her, then instructed her to return to her duties and bring his lunch later. Fran, however, expressed a strange premonition and a reluctance to leave him. She acknowledged his point, though she still felt a sense of unease. He then told her that while he was indeed prone to violence, she should call him any time something happened. He mused aloud, wondering if the cast of charm status wasn't them. He settled down with the beginner's magic book, declaring it was finally time for magic practice, now that he was alone. With a cheerful grin, he announced that his Helm's roleplay was off, implying a temporary shift in his demeanor or persona. The text further elaborated on two distinct patterns of magic: incantation, which forcibly activated magic by consuming mana through chanting, and mana manipulation, which involved manipulating mana with a clear image in mind to manifest the desired magical effect. Still engrossed in the book, Helms wondered aloud about the implications of these two types. Fran, who was cleaning nearby, chimed in, explaining that incantation had significant drawbacks, such as the inability to adjust its power. Helms quickly grasped this crucial flaw. A diagram illustrated the incantation method, showing that beginner spells consumed a fixed 10 mana for plus 10 damage/INT, while intermediate spells consumed 30 mana for plus 30 damage/INT. The mana consumption and damage were predetermined by the spell itself. In contrast, the mana manipulation diagram revealed a more flexible system. Mana consumption could range from 1 to 100, with damage and control being variable. This method allowed for fine-tuning of both mana expenditure and the resulting effect, without rigid beginner or intermediate classifications. Now understanding the nuances, Helms realized that mana manipulation offered additional benefits, such as expanding attack range and dispersing effects. He felt a strong desire to master this method and truly wield magic. He decided to attempt his first solo practice, beginning by focusing on moving the mana within his body. He imagined the mana, flowing like blood, gradually concentrating it into his hands. He successfully formed a small, glowing orb of mana in his palm, marveling at his own talent. It felt as natural as a sponge absorbing water. Amazed, he resolved to try again. He then attempted to increase the mana output, causing it to splash upwards. Next, he tried to decrease the output, and the mana dripped gently from his hand. He confirmed his success in manipulating the image of water. Pleased with his progress, he continued to manipulate mana, shaping it into fluid, ethereal forms that swirled around his hands. A wide grin spread across his face as he realized the immense flexibility and enjoyment magic offered, far surpassing the rigid discipline of swordsmanship. His practice was abruptly halted when Fran, the diligent maid, arrived to check on him. She gently reminded him that it was getting late, signaling the end of his magical studies for the day. In the mornings, he dedicated himself to swordsmanship instruction from his father, while afternoons were reserved for magical research. With only about a month remaining until his enrollment in the Royal Magic Academy's Advanced Division, he had, in a mere 2 weeks, gained free control over 5 magic attributes, excluding darkness. He continued his rigorous training, finally acquiring a minimum level of combat ability. His father, observing his son's rapid progress in both swordsmanship and mana manipulation, seemed quite impressed by the considerable speed of his development. Days later, he found himself sparring with the butler, his thoughts drifting. He lamented the lack of opportunities to freely venture out and level up in his current lifestyle. He began to consider the possibility of sneaking out of the house to explore a dungeon. As he practiced archery, he reflected on the approaching entrance ceremony for the Magic Academy, now just 1 week away. He knew this event would mark the true beginning of the game. He resolved to keep his plans for a dungeon excursion a secret from his father. Helms, clad in his ornate uniform, confirmed the sword he held was indeed one borrowed from his father's knights. He then interacted with a translucent interface, affirming his desire to place the remaining items into his inventory and declaring himself ready to venture into the dungeon. 2 weeks prior, Helms, in more casual attire, sat on his bed, lamenting his inability to access the status screen or inventory. Suddenly, he stood, holding a large, empty chest, a realization dawning upon him. He could now utilize the inventory. He noted its immense, though undefined, capacity, enough to store all his family's assets. Still in his casual wear, he sipped tea, observing that the black tea he had placed in his inventory days ago remained perfectly hot. He deduced that time did not flow within the inventory, a time-stopping effect that would undoubtedly prove useful in the future. He then conversed with Fran, the maid, asking if anything unusual had occurred. She confirmed that nothing out of the ordinary had transpired. Testing the limits of his new ability, he attempted to store a magic spell in his inventory, only to discover that it could neither absorb nor retain magical energies. Back in his Game World uniform, Helms noted that a month's worth of food had been successfully stored in his inventory. He glanced at the clock, confirming it was time. Declaring his intent to head to the dungeon, specifically the Corridor of Whispers, a mid-level dungeon located near the royal capital, he swiftly departed his room. He arrived at the entrance of a cave, the dungeon's gateway, a mere 10-minute walk from the royal capital's west gate. He felt a sense of relief that its location remained unchanged from his memories of the game, remarking that it had been a long time since he last visited this place. As he descended into the depths, the narration explained that while dungeon entrances typically appeared as caves, their interiors often took on vastly different forms. He was now entering the Corridor of Whispers, a mid-level dungeon. He soon found himself standing before a massive, dilapidated traditional Japanese house, its interior revealed to be a colossal structure of its kind. A shiver ran down his spine as he admitted that Japanese horror was quite terrifying when experienced in reality. Despite his apprehension, he tried to reassure himself, affirming that he could overcome this fear. He stood before the eerie house once more, reaffirming his resolve. Stepping inside, he found the interior dark and unsettling, illuminated by hanging lanterns. Upon encountering a small, blob-like monster, he reminded himself that this was the game world, a dungeon, and he possessed the means, his sword and magic, to resolve any challenge. He confidently declared that with his knowledge from a previous life, he would not lose his way within the dungeon's labyrinthine corridors. He understood that the dungeon's magic expanded and complicated its structure, but he also possessed foreknowledge of the monster placements, ensuring he would not engage in any useless battles. Continuing his careful advance, he cautiously peered around corner. There, guarding the corridor, stood a formidable skeleton warrior, its sword held ready. Nearby, the small, blob-like monster he had previously encountered remained, seemingly oblivious to his presence. Helms found himself surrounded by 3 skeleton warriors, their swords clashing against his. He knew that while skeletons were among the weakest of the undead, his current level 1 status meant he had to be cautious. He moved strategically, ensuring he wouldn't be caught from the front, understanding that if he couldn't guarantee his life, he couldn't act. He carefully observed their timing, knowing that if he moved without a clear path, an inevitable route to his demise would open. He continued his calculated movements, luring one of the skeletal foes to pursue him. As the skeletons followed, Helms ascended a flight of stairs, declaring his special move was ready. He mused that while fire and holy attributes were generally effective against undead monsters, holy magic might be slightly more potent against skeletons specifically. He then focused his magical energy, forming a swirling orb in his palm. He considered how to lower the output while increasing the power, imagining it as a magical bullet. The resistance of skeletons was low, he thought, making them ideal targets for such an experiment. With a decisive motion, he unleashed the concentrated magical blast, striking one of the skeleton warriors with blinding light and immense force. He observed the defeated skeletons, noting that his magic proficiency was still quite low. Meanwhile, in the real world, the player behind Helm's actions recalled that according to game knowledge, it would take 5 holy magic attacks to defeat a skeleton at initial stats. Helms grinned, realizing he would need to continue experimenting and leveling up for a while, allowing his MP to recover naturally. He then successfully cast another spell, a small, glowing orb forming in his hand. He continued his assault, unleashing more magical attacks against the remaining skeleton warriors, their forms shattering under the force of his spells. With a final, powerful surge of magic, he cast another spell, sending a wave of energy crashing into the last of his foes. Standing victorious over the pile of shattered bones, Helms checked his status screen, a satisfied smile on his face. He noted his level had increased significantly, now at level 6, and his magic proficiency for various elements, including holy, had risen to an initial level of 12 or 15. He knew he had to return home soon, or his family would begin to panic. This world, he mused, was unexpectedly full of dangers. He walked through the gate of the Lunicilia estate, checking his pocket watch, confident that his father would have no complaints as long as he grew stronger. Still, he needed an excuse for his prolonged absence. He continued his journey, realizing with a wry smile that he had somehow grown accustomed to the often horrific landscapes of this new reality. Days later, his daily life had become remarkably fulfilling. He spent his time researching magic, delving into dungeons, and making various excuses to pursue his studies. His new existence was rich with purpose. And now, finally, the day of the entrance ceremony arrived. He donned his uniform, contemplating his strategy. He would avoid the original protagonist of the game, and especially the lovely sorcerer, to prevent getting entangled in their destined events. Yet, a thrill ran through him at the thought of meeting Manurva, the main heroine. His thoughts then turned to the heroines. Manurva was the main heroine, but there were also other important characters. To unlock their individual story routes, he knew he would need to raise their affection levels. As he stepped through a grand doorway, he reminded himself that he was merely a background character, a mob, and could not interfere with the heroine's fated paths. He accepted this, finding joy in the prospect of supporting them from the sidelines. With a determined smile, he resolved to fully embody the role of Helms today. He stood among them at the academy, the main heroines of the game now before him. The game had officially begun. The Royal First Magic Academy prepared for its entrance ceremony in April, marking the beginning of the main story for the romance action RPG, Free Sorcerer. Carriages arrived, bringing students to the grand institution. Helms, inside one of the arriving carriages, reflected on his status as a mere background character, a mob, despite being 15 years old and attending the entrance ceremony alongside the game's protagonists. He felt a sense of ominous destiny, yet as a fan of the story, he couldn't help but be thrilled to be involved. He, meanwhile, was deep in thought, recalling how he had lived quietly until middle school, never flaunting his abilities. His family, however, expected him to stand out. He had decided to master both swordsmanship and magic, knowing that a peaceful life would now be difficult to achieve. His gaze then swept over the bustling town, a place where he knew his dreams lay waiting. He finally arrived, his eyes widening as he looked up at the magnificent academy building, a place he recognized from his previous life. The grand structure before him was none other than the Royal First Magic Academy, sprawling and majestic. As he stood before the academy, his maid, Fran, approached. He instructed her to handle his luggage, explaining that he would be living in the academy dorms for the next 3 years. Fran, however, expressed her concern, stating that she wouldn't be able to sleep at night if he got hurt. He reassured her, telling her not to worry and that he would be fine. He then stepped onto the academy grounds, a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling within him. His first task was to confirm his class assignment. However, the sheer number of students made progress difficult. He found himself jostled and pushed, unable to get a clear view of the class list amidst the overwhelming crowd. Suddenly, he was startled, catching a brief reflection of himself in a shiny object before his eyes landed on a familiar figure, one of the game's heroines, standing nearby. He found himself face-to-face with a stunning young woman who greeted him with a polite inquiry, asking if he was Helms. His expression shifted to one of utter surprise and slight embarrassment at her direct address. He quickly recognized her as Minerva von Sunlight, one of the main heroines from the game, lovely sorcerer, and, astonishingly, a member of a ducal house, just like himself. The realization that a central figure from the game stood before him left him utterly overwhelmed. Minerva, maintaining her composure, commented on the unexpected nature of their meeting, finding it quite peculiar to encounter him in such a setting. Still somewhat dazed, he could only manage a hesitant greeting in response. She then clarified that as fellow new students, it was only natural for their paths to converge at the academy. She further elaborated that the Sunlight Ducal House had served the kingdom for generations as judicial officers, dedicated to upholding justice and equality. Manurva then observed that Helms had not yet confirmed his class placement. With a kind smile, she offered her assistance, revealing that she was assigned to the same class, Group 1. Helms stared at Manurva, his eyes wide with disbelief. He grappled with a sudden, profound realization. Such a thing is possible. The classroom buzzed with conversation as Helms found himself surrounded by his new classmates. One of the male students explained that being in the same class as the main heroine naturally meant they were also classmates with the other heroines and the protagonist, a common setup since all the main characters of Love Sorcerer were in the same class. Manurva approached Helms, expressing her surprise but also her delight at being in the same class as him. She noted that he had always been interesting to her, being the first person in history to possess aptitude for all magic attributes, a fact that would naturally draw anyone's interest. Helms, however, found her attention annoying, thinking to himself that he was just himself now. The male student continued, mentioning that this year's special student should possess the same aptitude as himself, identifying him as Atlas, the protagonist of Love Sorcerer. Manurva acknowledged this, but then stated that if this Atlas possessed the same talent as Helms, she would be more interested in him. Helms reacted with a slight sound of confusion. Manurva, with a confident smirk, declared her endless interest in Helms, referring to him as the divine child from the Lunicelia Duke's family, possessing a promised bloodline and special talent. Helms, utterly bewildered, wondered if Manurva was truly this kind of character, letting out a confused, "Huh." Helms recoiled in surprise as Manurva suddenly cried out. He internally mused that in the game, she had been a much sharper and more severe character. He wondered if her current demeanor was because he was merely an acquaintance, not the protagonist, or perhaps because his charm stat was at its maximum. As Manurva cried out, another young woman stumbled, and Helms instinctively reached out, catching her before she fell. He looked at her with concern, asking if she was hurt. He held the young woman close, her face flushed with embarrassment. Helms, captivated by her appearance, found himself thinking she was incredibly cute and wondered if such a character had even existed in the game. The young woman let out a small cry, insisting she was fine, but Helms, observing her dizzy and flustered expression, countered that she didn't look fine at all. He reiterated his concern, asking if she was truly all right. She responded with a small, flustered sound, assuring him that she could easily heal minor injuries with holy magic. As he looked at her more closely, a sense of familiarity washed over Helms. He felt as though he knew this girl somehow. He found himself facing another heroine, Artemis von Aster, who appeared quite flustered. She seemed to be apologizing to him, concerned about his well-being, while he pondered her identity. He quickly reassured her, stating that he was not hurt and that she shouldn't worry about him. He emphasized that they were comrades, and she should not hesitate to speak if she felt any pain. Her flustered demeanor abruptly shifted as she erupted, accusing him of being incredibly dense. She declared that perhaps she should break one of his fingers to make him understand, leaving him utterly bewildered by her sudden outburst. He remained perplexed by her intense reaction, internally noting that she was the daughter of a renowned adventurer. She continued to express her frustration, telling him not to say such careless things and that she was not concerned about his injuries. Without another word, she abruptly turned and fled, leaving him stunned by her sudden departure. As he processed Artemis's hasty exit, Manurva suddenly appeared beside him, her expression unreadable as she asked if he was already finished with her. He recoiled in surprise. He stammered, trying to understand her meaning, while she continued to gaze at him, her question hanging in the air. She clarified her statement, explaining that she had merely been waiting for him to conclude his conversation with the other beautiful girl. Then, with a bright smile, she offered to be his partner for the class, causing him to blush and become flustered. Helms and Artemis walked through the bustling school hallway, surrounded by other students. Artemis remarked on the delicious-looking sweets and the rumors circulating about the maids. Helms, observing the time, noted that it was almost time for class. As they entered the classroom, Helms expressed his relief that Artemis was in a good mood. Inside, a new instructor, Teresia Bell, introduced herself to the class, explaining that she would be their teacher from that day forward and requesting their cooperation for at least 1 year. She further revealed that, unlike most individuals who could only wield a single magical attribute, she possessed the rare ability to handle two. Helms listened intently, observing her. Teresia then announced that the simple contact period was over and formal classes would commence the following day. She continued with a grave tone, sharing important news. Multiple abduction incidents had recently occurred in the royal capital, with children of nobles and young ladies being targeted. She advised everyone to exercise caution if they planned to go out during holidays. Helms reacted with a surprised grunt, questioning the abduction incidents, while Manurva asked if he was truly unaware. Helms reflected on the details, noting the indiscriminate nature of the abductions, targeting both commoners and nobles, and found the situation deeply unsettling. Artemis, standing nearby, agreed, also finding it quite strange. Teresia continued her lecture, explaining that the game's prologue typically involved practicing magic with the heroine and engaging in sparring, which would lead to a romance route. Helms, however, considered how any irregular movement on his part would likely lead to a separate, individual route in the second year. He pondered the abduction incidents, wondering if his reincarnation into this world was causing irregularities that might affect the main story, the protagonist, and the heroine. He concluded that it might be best to act to resolve the situation, even if it meant becoming a guard. Teresia concluded the orientation, stating that she would gather more detailed information later. Helms felt an inexplicable sense of being drawn into the events. The entrance ceremony ended without any long speeches from the principal, concluding uneventfully. Later, Helms approached Teresia, asking if she had any information about the characteristics of the culprits involved in the abduction incidents. Teresia acknowledged him, seemingly recalling something. She explained that the guards had mentioned a highly skilled swordsman among the culprits, and the organization seemed quite sophisticated. She described them as a group of coordinated swordsmen. As the discussion of the capital's recent abductions continued, Helms expressed his deep concern to Artemis. He noted that while they were safe within the academy, the public order outside was deteriorating, making the situation quite unsettling. He lamented that if only Grail von Winter, the father of one of the main heroines and the strongest character in the original game, were in the royal capital, things might be different. He recalled Grail's immense power, a sword master who commanded the royal knights and was considered the strongest knight in the kingdom. His strength was such that he could single-handedly defeat a level 60 boss-class monster. Helms mused that such a character had not existed in the game, wondering if Grail had been an auxiliary character in the Freya route, someone he could have relied upon. As their conversation concluded, Helms thanked Artemis for her words. She, in turn, cautioned him to be extremely careful when going out on his days off, emphasizing that he should absolutely avoid venturing out at night. He considered her warning, knowing that the Holy Maiden was currently exploring a high-level dungeon, a situation that felt quite distant from their current reality. Suddenly, a voice cut through the quiet of the library, exclaiming, "Found them!" Helms, engrossed in a book, realized he was holding a real book of intermediate magic. He noted that it primarily detailed the operation and control of magic, and he eagerly anticipated discovering its specific examples. As he continued to read, a new idea sparked in his mind, making him want to delve deeper into the text. However, his excitement was quickly tempered by the realization that magic books were not permitted to be lent out. Resigned, he decided he would simply have to frequent the library until he mastered intermediate magic. He also considered it an opportune moment to improve his magic operation skills and raise his status in preparation for the common event test scheduled for 1 month later. He then cast a quick glance towards Manurva. The next morning, Helms stretched with a yawn, acknowledging his lack of interest in the morning lectures. He reminded himself that the afternoon would bring practical sword and magic training, marking the official start of his full-fledged classes. Later, as he practiced, a small flame flickered to life in his palm, a testament to his growing ability to freely wield magic. Just then, Fran, his maid, arrived to greet him, asking if he had slept well. As he ate breakfast, he inquired if the delicious meal was Fran's handiwork. She clarified that it was prepared by the academy's resident chef, but he insisted her cooking was excellent. He then playfully suggested she should come to his room to help him train, causing her to blush and dismiss it as a joke. Fran and Manurva discussed the start of classes, with Manurva expressing her enjoyment of the general education in the middle school division. Helms joined their conversation, admitting he was also looking forward to it. He noted Manurva's top-tier fire magic and sword skills, hoping to use her as a reference for his own progress. Artemis listened intently nearby. He then smiled, stating his intention to work hard to achieve results that would not disappoint Manurva. She returned his smile, expressing her hope to fully utilize his talents. Artemis continued to observe their exchange. During the morning lecture, Helms found most of the content to be general education, but the occasional discussions about healing and magic proved interesting. He diligently took notes, while Manurva and Artemis also attended the class. The teacher, Teresia, continued her history lesson, explaining that the world was currently 4 hours into a war between humans and the demon realm, where a hero had once defeated a wicked demon king. She added that the number of monsters now exceeded a certain limit. As she asked if there were any questions about monsters and demon domains, Helms's mind conjured a vivid image of a fierce battle. He listened as the teacher explained the historical defeat of the demon race, attributing their loss not to a lack of strength, but to their comparatively small numbers against the vast human armies. Despite the hero's victory, the teacher noted, the demon realm proved impossible to fully eradicate, its lands still teeming with the spirits of the human world. He pondered the cyclical nature of conflict, realizing that even this seemingly peaceful world was destined to repeat its bloody history, a fate shared by both Earth and the other world. The teacher continued, lamenting that the legendary holy sword, wielded by the hero and described as a distinctive pure white blade, remained undiscovered even after centuries. She expressed a desire to see it just once. Helms, however, felt a blush creep onto his face, realizing that the appearance of both the Holy Sword and the Demon King was imminent, a detail not explicitly covered in the game's lore. He resolved that if he found the Holy Sword, he would meticulously investigate it as crucial research material. She further elaborated that the Demon King, possessing immense power, could not be slain even by the hero. Instead, he was sealed away using the Holy Sword and a special power. The method to break this seal remained unknown to all, a secret guarded even in death. Helms noted this as another significant deviation from the game's original narrative. He stared forward, a profound realization dawning upon him. Perhaps he was the only one in this entire world who truly understood the unfolding route of events. A distant bell chimed, its sound echoing through the halls. The teacher concluded the morning's lecture, announcing that classes were dismissed until after lunch, when practical swordsmanship training would commence. She instructed everyone to gather at the first training ground promptly. Meanwhile, the trainer butler, a knowing smile on his face, leaned on his staff, anticipating their arrival. A stern-faced teacher addressed a gathering of first-year students, including Helms and Manurva, in the training grounds. He welcomed them, his voice echoing across the open space. The teacher, Simon Gates, declared himself an instructor and knight of the academy, warning the students that the advanced classes would involve more practical and intense lessons. Helms, observing the man's booming voice, internally noted its excessive volume. Moments later, Simon instructed the students to prepare for a mock battle using wooden swords. The students, including Helms and Manurva, promptly responded with a unified yes and assumed their stances. After observing their initial practice, Simon commended some students for their good form. He then announced a change in the exercise, instructing them to stop their individual practice and form pairs for the mock battles, a directive that visibly surprised Helms. Helms found himself surrounded by other students, feeling awkward about the pairing process. He wondered if he would be forced to spar with the teacher, a prospect he found particularly unappealing, just as someone called out his name. Manurva, the lovely sorcerer, approached Helms directly, asking if he would be willing to cross swords with her. Helms was utterly shocked, recognizing her, and internally noting that this unexpected turn of events felt precisely like a romance subplot from the game. As Manurva made her request, a male student nearby reacted with visible frustration, exclaiming about the protagonist's actions and lamenting that he would now be hated. Helms, meanwhile, remained bewildered by the unfolding situation. The frustrated male student continued his internal monologue, questioning if Helms was speaking to a classmate, then dismissing his own thoughts as an unknown development. Manurva, noticing Helms's confusion, gently inquired if something was amiss. Manurva reiterated her request, asking Helms to please spar with her. Helms, still flustered, internally mused about a more appealing alternative before finally agreeing to the mock battle for the time being. With their decision made, Helms and Manurva faced each other, wooden swords in hand, ready to begin their mock battle. In the background, other students had already commenced their own sparring matches, filling the training ground with the sounds of practice. He found himself immediately on the defensive, his wooden sword clashing repeatedly against Manurva's. Her attacks were relentless, forcing him to parry strike after strike. The intensity of her assault continued, and he realized her swordsmanship was surprisingly aggressive, almost murderous, despite her background. She aimed relentlessly for his neck, but then, with a sudden shift, she targeted his leg, forcing him to react quickly. He noted her stance was low, and her intent was clearly to disable his lower body. He managed to block the low strike, a spark of determination in his eyes. He thought it was a good tactic and decided he would try to mirror her approach. Manurva, witnessing his unexpected counter, seemed momentarily surprised. Following his resolve, he swiftly retaliated, aiming a low strike at her leg. She recoiled, surprised by his sudden change in tactics, wondering about this unfamiliar swordsmanship he was employing. Their mock battle continued with renewed ferocity, both combatants now focusing on low attacks, their wooden swords clashing near their feet. Other students watched the intense exchange, their expressions a mix of awe and bewilderment. The exchange escalated, their movements a blur of parries and thrusts, each trying to gain an advantage with their low, aggressive strikes. Suddenly, Manurva called out, demanding a change in their roles, signaling a new phase in their intense sparring match. Manurva, engaged in a fierce sword spar, reacted with wide-eyed surprise as Helms executed a swift maneuver. She questioned the nature of his sudden move, her blades still locked in a defensive posture. Helms, observing Manurva's technique, internally noted her continued inexperience, believing he could absorb her skills if he focused on her weaknesses. He eagerly suggested they continue their practice. Manurva, trembling with frustration, realized Helms was not merely sparring, but actively replicating her techniques after witnessing them only once. He, meanwhile, watched with a knowing smirk. Despite her frustration, Manurva surged forward with renewed determination, declaring she would not allow him to underestimate her and would defeat him first. Helms braced himself for her assault. Moments later, Manurva knelt, defeated, her sword stuck in the ground as she admitted her loss, unable to properly wield her weapon any longer. Helms, though slightly winded, appeared content with the outcome. As the sparring concluded, the surrounding students murmured in awe, praising both Manurva's impressive performance and Helms's undeniable skill. He, in turn, wiped sweat from his brow, a satisfied expression on his face. He then pondered his unique ability, acknowledging that while it was usually dangerous to attempt to steal an opponent's techniques mid-battle, he was an exception to such conventional wisdom. He smiled, envisioning how Manurva's elegant sword style would further enhance his own abilities. He believed that by continuously absorbing techniques, he would grow even stronger, a prospect that thrilled him. An ecstatic grin spread across his face as he clenched his fists, reveling in the surge of new possibilities that accompanied his rapidly accumulating experience. He found the sensation exhilarating. Meanwhile, Minerva sat dejectedly, covering her face as she contemplated a rematch, certain she would lose again. In the background, Helms received congratulations from other students, one of whom noted his victory was due to superior stamina. Minerva felt a profound sense of frustration, still reeling from her defeat. Minerva listened as Helms offered words of encouragement. He asserted that she was still growing and that he, too, was far from mastering her sword techniques. He urged her not to give up, reminding her that anyone who persevered would ultimately become strong, and that her unique talent was not so special that she could afford to stop here. He continued, promising his cooperation and suggesting they grow stronger together. His earnestness seemed to resonate with her, a faint blush appearing on her cheeks as she considered his words. Minerva thanked him, expressing her gratitude for his unwavering support. Helms then extended his hand, offering to help her further, which caused her to blush even more deeply. She accepted his offer, agreeing to rely on him from that point forward. Later, in a bustling classroom, students engaged in various activities, some sparring with swords, others practicing magic. Helms and Minerva stood among them, with Minerva leaning close to Helms, much to his visible discomfort. He felt a pang of embarrassment at her proximity, wondering if their newfound closeness was appropriate. Just then, the teacher, Teresia Bell, announced that the day's lesson would focus on magic. Teresia began her instruction by demonstrating mana manipulation, conjuring a small, controlled flame in her palm. She explained that while it might seem dangerous, the fundamental principle was the collection and control of magical power. Her movements were fluid and precise, showcasing her mastery. Following her guidance, Helms focused, imagining a small tornado forming in his hand. He successfully manifested a swirling vortex of mana, a feat he realized he had learned through self-study. Noting that while a large amount of mana was difficult to control, simple magical transformations were within his grasp. He felt a surge of excitement, realizing the immense potential hidden within magic. He yearned to delve deeper, to understand and test the destructive power it held. Helms pondered the implications of unleashing such power, wondering what kind of damage it could inflict. A wave of curiosity washed over him, a desire to explore this new facet of his abilities. To avoid causing harm, Helms channeled his curiosity into a powerful defensive spell, manifesting a swirling vortex of mana around his hand. It was a protective barrier, a testament to his rapid adaptation and control. He winced, feeling a sharp pain in his hand, but then a faint glow enveloped it. It hurts quite a bit, he mused, but with this level of divine magic, I can heal it right away. A moment later, his hand was perfectly fine, the injury completely gone. Yep, good as new. With his healing complete, he shifted his focus to physical training, executing a powerful, sweeping kick that sent ripples through the air. He felt a surge of excitement, declaring, "All right, from now on, I'll experiment with my own body. There are so many things I want to try." He then considered his next move. Next, I'll try flying with wind magic. His attempt at flight, however, proved less graceful than anticipated. He found himself plummeting downwards, a look of wide-eyed surprise on his face. "Oh no," he exclaimed, realizing too late. "I didn't think about the landing." Below, several students and teacher Teresia looked up, startled by his sudden descent. The unplanned descent culminated in a massive splash as he crashed into a large body of water, sending spray high into the air. He emerged, gasping, completely soaked. As he surfaced, dripping wet but with a triumphant grin, he acknowledged teacher Teresia, thanking her. She observed him with a thoughtful expression, remarking on his incredible aptitude. "Amazing," he thought. "If I can properly control magic, I can do so many things." Her thoughtful expression quickly turned to one of stern disapproval as she began to scold him. She acknowledged his extraordinary talent and curiosity for magic, but warned him that such power also carried inherent dangers. She emphasized that he needed to recognize and respect those risks. Days later, a holiday arrived, marking the first time students were permitted outside the dorms. He stood among his peers, dressed in his formal uniform, a wide smile on his face. "It feels like it's been a while," he mused. "Today is a leveling up day at the Whispering Labyrinth." As he prepared to depart, Maid Fran approached him, her expression one of concern. She inquired, "Helms, where are you going?" He, however, seemed intent on avoiding her questions, perhaps eager to begin his adventure. Fran confronted Helms, demanding to know his destination. He, exasperated, lamented his inability to visit the dungeon. She firmly reminded him that he was forbidden from leaving the premises. With a sigh, he expressed a longing for a solitary day off. She then presented his student identification, assuring him that with it, he could safely enjoy a rare holiday in the city. However, he countered, warning her of the recent dangers in the royal capital, citing rumors of abductions. She dismissed his concerns, insisting the situation was not as dire as he believed, but he remained steadfast in his conviction that it was perilous. Despite his protests, she declared her intention to accompany him on his outing. He slumped, realizing that with her presence, his hopes for a truly relaxing day off were dashed. His thoughts were interrupted as she leaned in close, startling him. A blush crept onto his face as he thanked her, acknowledging her concern and expressing how touched he was by her thoughtfulness. She looked up at him, a surprised expression on her face. Moments later, Helms found himself outside, seemingly having successfully evaded Fran. He punched the air with excitement, declaring his return to the dungeon and relishing the prospect of leveling up for the first time in a week. He approached the imposing, traditional-style entrance of the dungeon, a confident smirk playing on his lips as he mused that he had grown accustomed to its horrors. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, he confidently reiterated his lack of fear. Yet, his bravado faltered as he discovered someone already within the dark confines. He exclaimed in shock, recognizing Artemis. She, equally startled, questioned his presence in the dungeon. She then clarified her own reason for being there, stating it was for a training trip. Pointing at her, he apologized for his assumption, then asked if her training implied she was there to become stronger. A small, dark creature scurried past them on the floor. She quickly denied his interpretation, her hands raised in a flustered gesture. He looked at her, puzzled, and asked for clarification. Her expression troubled. She confessed her true reason for being in the dungeon. She was there to search for her father, the adventurer Asta. She further explained that Asta, known in the world as a frequent disappearer, had been missing for about a month this time. Her daughter, she clarified, had deliberately come to the dungeon to find him. Helms, understanding the situation, asked if she was accustomed to dungeon exploration, noting that going alone was dangerous. She quickly denied it, explaining that her mother had forbidden her from searching for her father. He then asserted that she should return immediately, as it was simply too dangerous for a young girl to be in the dungeon alone, a fact he could not overlook. She vehemently refused, insisting that there might be traces of her father within the dungeon. With a determined look, she presented a book, claiming it belonged to her father. The book contained a list of intriguing names: Hero's Necklace, Hero's Black Onyx, Hero's Return, Moonlight Sword, and Hero's Epic. These, she noted, were all listed in the setting materials. Helms recognized the items from a previous class, confirming their validity against monsters and demons. Artemis explained that these were the only items she could immediately confirm from the book, and she was fully aware of the dangers involved. He acknowledged her resolve, but reiterated the inherent dangers of the place, stating that if anything were to happen to her, he and her family would grieve. She began to protest, but he cut her off, declaring his intention to help her search for her father and protect her. He further elaborated, explaining that he wanted to assist her and Asta and also alleviate her father's worries about her being at the academy. He extended his hand, offering his aid. He, with a confident and sparkling demeanor, declared that he would stake his life to protect her. She, still somewhat flustered by his intense gaze, could only manage a soft "yes, please," as he turned and began to lead the way down the dungeon corridor. Moments later, he plunged into the fray, his sword ablur as he effortlessly dispatched the grotesque slime monsters that emerged. He announced that this was his chance to level up, and she would be accompanying him. He continued his relentless assault, moving with practiced ease through the horde, while she watched, a mix of awe and bewilderment on her face. After the skirmish, he paused, and a translucent status screen materialized before him, displaying his current statistics. Helms von Lunacelia, male, 15 years old, level 12 with all core stats, SDR, VIT, AGI, INT, at 43. His magic proficiency and swordsmanship levels were also detailed, along with his impressive charm stat of 100. She stared, wide-eyed, at the screen, then at him, marveling at his power. He simply stated that defeating monsters was easy. He then inquired if she was unfamiliar with the concept of levels, realizing their previous conversation had been somewhat disjointed. He explained that the monsters here were weak enough for him to defeat easily at his current level. She, however, seemed confused by the very notion of levels. As more slime monsters appeared, he effortlessly cut them down, his blades slicing through their forms with precision. He apologized to her for the sudden display, assuring her it was fine, and suggested they discuss the concept of levels properly. He clarified that levels were like an indicator of strength, and since the dungeon's enemies were weaker than him, he could defeat them easily. She, still processing, asked if he meant she was bad at combat. He confirmed that, for now, her combat skills were indeed lacking. She then reflected on her own experience, realizing that even just fighting monsters felt like a significant challenge for her. She wondered if her father, Asta, had also struggled in the same way, or if he was truly as strong as she believed. Helms, observing her thoughtful expression, reassured her that such thoughts were unnecessary. She walked beside Helms, who advised her to forge her own path, distinct from others, because it was her life. He emphasized that her talent was irrelevant to this principle. Below, Helms pondered that this was likely not what her parents desired for her future. As they ascended a staircase, he offered to come to her aid anytime she needed help or made a mistake, extending a hand to assist her. They finally reached the top of the stairs. She looked up at Helms with a blush, thanking him, then apologizing. Helms, looking away, thought to himself, probably. That's not what her parents want for her future, is it? Artemis gasped, realizing they were in a monster room, a strange chamber where many monsters appeared. Helms confirmed her observation with a slight smile. He turned to Artemis, acknowledging that such a room was indeed very dangerous, but reassured her that he had prepared countermeasures. He then declared that he would open the entrance door first. Artemis reacted with a surprised gasp as he reached for the door. Helms pushed the heavy door open with both hands, revealing the dark interior. Artemis watched, still wide-eyed with surprise. With the door now ajar, he stepped forward, announcing that he would enter first to confirm the situation inside. As Helms entered, a multitude of grotesque monsters, including skeletons and slimes, suddenly swarmed from the shadows, overwhelming the chamber. He turned back, a confident smile on his face, while Artemis stared in utter terror at the horrifying spectacle. Helms unleashed a torrent of fire, engulfing the skeletal warriors that surrounded him and Manurva. The undead, vulnerable to the searing flames, recoiled as Manurva watched, her expression a mixture of shock and alarm. He continued his relentless assault, a powerful burst of fire erupting from his hand, pushing back the encroaching horde of skeletons. A confident smile spread across his face as his fire magic proved effective, consuming the undead. He noted that while fast-moving zombies were weak to wind, the undead were particularly susceptible to fire, a strategic advantage he was keen to exploit. With a triumphant cry, he unleashed another wave of magic, this time combining wind with the lingering flames. The combined attack created a devastating vortex, its effects spreading rapidly among the remaining monsters, much to Manurva's continued astonishment. The area became a maelstrom of swirling wind and fire, obliterating the last of the skeletal foes. Helms let out a hearty laugh, reveling in the overwhelming success of his strategy. Satisfied, he quickly checked his status, pleased with the progress. He then turned to Manurva, urging her to move, explaining that it was too dangerous to linger in their current position. With a decisive kick, he flung open a heavy door, declaring the operation a complete success and anticipating a rise in his level. Manurva, still processing the events, simply called out his name. He turned to her, a reassuring smile on his face, as she stammered, asking if he had seen the room above and if he was truly all right. He calmly assured her that he was fine. Standing in the threshold of the dungeon, Helms gestured around, explaining to Manurva that this was the true nature of such places. Manurva, still bewildered, asked what a dungeon truly was. Helms, with a thoughtful expression, suggested it might be better for her not to know, while internally pondering if the monsters within had already reset. He celebrated his success with a triumphant thumbs up, having just cleared the dungeon. Manurva, along with Artemis and the other heroines, looked on in surprise. He then turned to Manurva, acknowledging that Artemis's voice had startled the monsters, and suggested they return to his father. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape, he and Manurva walked away from the dungeon entrance. He noted that thanks to their efforts, his level had now risen to 18. Continuing their journey, he observed that there had been no trace of Count Asta within the dungeon. Manurva, walking beside him, looked downcast, confirming his observation with a quiet affirmation. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a silent comfort. She confessed that while she hadn't truly expected to find her father, the reality of his absence still brought a pang of sadness. As they continued to walk, he reassured her, stating that even without concrete evidence, he was certain everything would be fine. He emphasized that dwelling on negative thoughts would only hinder them. Manurva looked up at him, her expression brightening as she agreed that perseverance was crucial. He offered a confident smile, asserting that the Count was a skilled adventurer and undoubtedly alive. She then addressed him with a respectful, almost tender tone. His demeanor suddenly shifted, becoming stern as he emphatically instructed her to always inform him if she intended to venture into a dungeon again. He warned her that he would be furious if she ever went alone. Manurva, startled by his intensity, quickly agreed. A satisfied smile returned to his face as he acknowledged her promise. Manurva, also smiling brightly, assured him that she would absolutely tell him, her eyes sparkling with renewed resolve. With their conversation concluded, he turned and walked away from the dungeon entrance, waving goodbye to Manurva and the other heroines who remained. He considered returning home to perform maintenance on his weapons. As he walked through the town streets, he glanced back to see Artemis waving goodbye to him. He offered a slight nod in return, acknowledging her farewell before continuing on his way. He had just departed from the heroines when a piercing scream echoed through the city streets, startling him. He paused, his hand instinctively gripping the hilt of his sword, wondering if he had truly heard a voice. Moments later, the scream came again, clearer this time, confirming his fears. He wasted no time, turning and sprinting with urgent strides towards the source of the distress, his uniform fluttering behind him. He burst into a narrow alleyway, his eyes widening in horror at the sight before him. Manurva and Artemis lay unconscious on the ground, their forms limp, while two masked figures stood menacingly over them, one clutching a large sword, the other a shorter blade. The masked figures immediately turned their attention to him, one of them demanding to know his identity. He did not answer, instead deflecting a swift kick from the first assailant and preparing for combat. He moved with incredible speed, dodging another attack before unleashing a torrent of dark energy. With a chilling incantation, he cast corrupting advanced magic, Nightmare, a spell that manifested as a grotesque swirl of disembodied eyes and mouths, engulfing one of the attackers. The masked assailant screamed in agony as the nightmare magic took hold, his eyes bulging and distorting as if witnessing unspeakable horrors. He thrashed wildly, completely incapacitated by the terrifying illusion. He held the writhing thug firmly, demanding to know who had sent them. The assailant, still disoriented by the magic, weakly claimed to be nothing more than a good, ordinary citizen. With both attackers now subdued, one defeated by his magic, and the other lying unconscious, he rushed past them, his gaze fixed on Manurva. He called out her name, his voice filled with concern as he knelt beside her. He gently checked on Manurva, then on Artemis, a wave of relief washing over him as he realized they were merely unconscious. He let out a soft sigh, grateful they were not more seriously harmed. As he watched over them, Manurva began to stir, a soft groan escaping her lips as she slowly started to regain consciousness. As Manurva slowly regained consciousness, she found Helms kneeling beside her, his hand gently holding hers. He greeted her softly, asking if she was hurt. Her mind, still hazy, registered the touch and his proximity, causing a flush to spread across her face. She gasped, her thoughts racing in confusion and embarrassment. Asterisk wa? Why is Helms-sama here? Asterisk, this was an incident that should not have occurred within the main story. Helm stood over two bound figures, their faces obscured by masks, as Manurva and Fran looked on. He explained that the men had been nearby, so he had incapacitated and tied them up to prevent further trouble. Manurva, overwhelmed with relief, profusely thanked Helms for saving her. He dismissed her gratitude, stating that as a duke's son, he needed no further thanks, for what he desired, he would obtain with his own hands. Moments later, Fran embraced Manurva tightly, her voice filled with profound relief as she whispered how glad she was that Manurva was safe. As Fran continued to hold her, Helms calmly stated that he was healing Manurva's wounds with holy magic and expected her to awaken soon. Manurva, still recovering, vowed to repay his kindness, swearing by the name of the Sunlight Duchy. Manurva, now fully awake and blushing, looked at Helms with wide, admiring eyes, exclaiming that he was like a prince from story. He, in turn, reiterated that there was no need for further thanks, as he had simply acted to help. Internally, he reaffirmed his belief that as a duke's son, he needed nothing more, and what he truly desired, he would seize with his own hands. She continued to praise him, mentioning her childhood love for books. Helms, visibly flustered and touching his cheek, internally admitted that as an ordinary person in his previous life, such praise felt incredibly embarrassing. Suddenly, Manurva's expression hardened, and she sharply declared that he was wrong. Helms, taken aback, questioned her sudden change in demeanor. He attempted to calm her, assuring her that he understood. Internally, he resolved to cherish this unexpected emotional gap within his heart. Manurva, still somewhat agitated, hesitantly asked if that was truly the case. Helms escorted Manurva to the grand gates of the Sunlight Duchy, where she thanked him for the escort. He confirmed that the guards would take over from there, ensuring her safety within the duchy. As she departed, he paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. He murmured to himself, pondering the Manurva abduction incident. He realized that there had been no heroine abduction incident in the prologue of the game Love Song, nor had Manurva been kidnapped in any of her individual routes. He found this deeply unsettling, suspecting that perhaps this event was unfolding behind the scenes of the original scenario, or that he simply hadn't been aware of such a pattern in the game itself. He considered the possibility that the abduction was a trap, a setup designed to extract valuable information from the guards. A disagreeable premonition settled over him. Still, he decided it would be better to wait for contact rather than investigate alone. As he stood there, a strange sensation suddenly gripped him. He shivered, a chill running down his spine as he scanned the quiet street, feeling an unsettling presence. He questioned if it was merely his imagination, his gaze sweeping across the rooftops under the moonlit sky. As he continued his walk through the capital, a profound sense of abnormality seemed to envelop the entire city. Meanwhile, a mysterious cloaked figure observed the city from a vantage point, murmuring about the situation. This is quite interesting, they mused. The cloaked figure moved with a swift, silent grace, revealing their knowledge of Helms von Lunacelia's name and his possession of the same magical aptitude as the abducted girl. They considered how this could be utilized for their plan. They acknowledged Helms's high perception ability, realizing that any hasty move would risk exposing their entire scheme. With a decisive turn, the cloaked figure declared their intention to deploy their heralds, stating that they were just about to recapture Manurva anyway. Back in the bustling square, Helm stood among other students, his expression thoughtful, as a general commotion filled the air around them. He pondered the unfolding events, realizing the current scenario deviated significantly from the protagonist's expected actions. The impossible abduction of Manurva, the main heroine, weighed heavily on his mind, and he sensed a growing abnormality in the world around him. This subtle deviation from the world he knew was confirmed by the mundane sight of a room, key marked I, and the familiar greeting of a maid, who wished him a good morning, addressing him as Lord Helms. Moments later, Manurva, surprisingly energetic despite the previous night's ordeal, greeted him with a cheerful wave. He, still processing the strangeness of the situation, could only wonder why she, who had almost been abducted just last night, was already back at school. She explained that as a student, her presence was natural, though she acknowledged his concern. With a soft smile, she thanked him profusely for his help the previous night, assuring him she was completely unharmed thanks to his intervention. Her father had even granted her permission to attend. He internally mused about the Duke of Sunlight, Manurva's father, realizing how challenging it would be to convince such a powerful figure. He also recalled his own actions, having effectively beaten up the country's guardian, a thought that brought a bead of sweat to his brow. Manurva, observing his troubled expression, tilted her head slightly. She then pouted, explaining that she had wanted to see him and that her father had permitted her to attend school specifically so she could express her gratitude. He was taken aback, wondering if her presence was truly just for him to receive a thank you. He tried to dismiss her reasoning, stating that such an action was unlike a main heroine. Manurva, however, grew visibly upset, asserting that it was only natural to thank someone who had helped her. She challenged him, asking if he considered her a bad person for wanting to express gratitude. Caught off guard, he quickly tried to backtrack, insisting he hadn't meant it in that way. She then demanded he smile, her expression still stern. She continued, explaining that her parents were profoundly grateful for his assistance, and that she would properly convey their thanks at a later time. He remained visibly uncomfortable, caught in her earnest insistence. He watched her, noting how remarkably energetic she was, almost as if the attempted abduction had never occurred. As the day progressed, the afternoon brought practical training. During the practical training, he found himself sparring with Manurva, who displayed surprising strength, pushing him back with her attacks. He mused internally, wondering if she had grown remarkably stronger in just one day, perhaps due to special training in the dungeon during her day off. He cautioned Manurva that if she truly wished to explore dungeons, she must first obtain proper permission from her parents and always be accompanied by a guard. He emphasized the danger, stating that dying would be an inconvenience. Despite his warnings, she beamed with excitement, asking if she too could grow stronger by venturing into dungeons. He looked at her, bewildered by her unwavering enthusiasm, while the trainer stood by, observing the exchange. He found himself utterly exhausted, collapsing onto a nearby bench, lamenting that today's training had been far too intense. She, however, remained vibrant and energetic, seemingly unaffected by the rigorous session. Later, back at his residence, he received a formal letter from Fran, his maid. She explained that it was a thank you note from Manurva, expressing gratitude for saving her, and also an invitation to a tea party on Sunday. He immediately suspected a trap, realizing that if he refused an invitation from a duke, it would be considered incredibly rude. He muttered, frustrated, that this was precisely the kind of abnormality he had come to expect. Fran confirmed that the duke would indeed be pleased if he attended, further solidifying his suspicion that this was a calculated move. He internally grumbled about the inconvenience. While outside, Manurva walked casually, seemingly unaware of the machinations surrounding her invitation. Early in the morning, Artemis greeted Helms with an enthusiastic wave, her voice bright as she expressed her gratitude. She wished to thank him properly for his assistance in the dungeon. She then bowed deeply, reiterating her thanks for his help. He, however, dismissed her apologies, explaining that he also wished to meet her father, Asta, and that their interests aligned perfectly. He inquired if she was still searching for her father. She confirmed her ongoing quest, adding that her next destination was a place called Raccoon. He mused over the name, Raccoon, realizing it was a dungeon perfectly suited for enhancing both magic and sword skill proficiency. He approved of the idea, finding it quite appealing. He then proposed they venture together to the final boss area, cautioning that the boss of an intermediate dungeon would still be too formidable for her current level, which hovered around 30. She reacted with a surprised gasp. Artemis hesitated, asking if it would truly be acceptable to burden him further. He reassured her, stating that it was no trouble at all and encouraged her to rely on him more. As he gently took her hands, a blush spread across her cheeks. Just then, Manurva appeared, greeting Helms. Manurva, her expression stern, immediately questioned Helms about his activities with Artemis, declaring his actions improper and warning him against making secret promises that could be misinterpreted. Artemis, flustered, denied any such promises, but Helms, with a knowing smile, confirmed his secret promise to his sister. Manurva looked utterly shocked. Growing increasingly agitated, Manurva leaned in close to Helms, demanding to know the specifics of his assistance. She noted their close proximity and a pleasant scent, then sternly warned him that his actions were suspicious and dangerous, urging him to explain further. Helms, flustered by Minerva's intensity, apologized and asked her to understand that his help for Artemis was a private matter. He explained that if his true identity were revealed, he would be hated by many. Minerva, still suspicious, acknowledged his point but remained wary, noticing that Helms's hand was still holding Artemis's. He then suggested they escort Artemis to the classroom, as the bell was about to ring. Minerva agreed, then turned to Helms with a question. She held the invitation, questioning why it had been sent to her instead of directly to Helms, especially since they were in the same class. She believed it was proper noble etiquette to deliver it in person. A soft smile graced her lips as she imagined Helms's reaction to the letter, finding the thought endearing. He, however, looked utterly bewildered by her words. She then insisted that Helms should be more proud, reminding him that he was the hero who had saved the Duke's daughter. He, looking uncomfortable, internally scoffed at the idea of being a hero, especially after only a month since his reincarnation, feeling it sounded like a cheap novel title. He wondered if Minerva's affection for him was truly growing, or if it was merely his imagination. Meanwhile, she cheerfully greeted everyone around them. On the appointed Sunday, a beautiful day for a tea party, Helms, Minerva, and Fran departed in a grand carriage, escorted by guards, as if blessed by the heavens themselves. Moments later, they arrived at the magnificent sunlight ducal house. Minerva, beaming, extended a warm welcome to them. As they walked through the grand estate, Minerva asked Helms if he remembered the last time he had visited her home, specifically a winter party from the previous year. He recalled the rare, fantastical snow that had fallen that day. She then expressed a desire to see the snowy landscape with him again. He, however, internally recoiled, thinking that winter was out of the question, especially for a mere background character like himself, who shouldn't interfere with such important events. With a gentle gesture, she urged him to hurry, explaining that her parents were eagerly awaiting his arrival. As they entered, Duke Sunlight, a man of imposing presence, greeted Helms with an exceptionally warm and boisterous welcome, expressing his gratitude for his attendance at the tea party. He continued his probing, asking if Helms was struggling with women, given his beauty. Helms chuckled, dismissing the notion, but internally noted the Duke's lack of tact, finding his bluntness rather refreshing. The Duke then observed Minerva, noting how her radiance seemed to increase daily, undoubtedly due to Helms. He greeted Helms warmly, who, despite the pleasantries, internally cursed the Duke as a bastard for his underlying intentions. Minerva, turning to her father, asked if he was jealous of Helms's beauty and his wife. The Duke, taken aback, exclaimed that Helms hadn't changed a bit since his student days, while he himself had aged considerably. He then tried to steer the conversation back to his son. Minerva offered a quick apology and rose from her seat, excusing herself from the table. Helms watched her, while the Duke's gaze followed, a thoughtful expression on his face. As she passed, Minerva leaned in close to Helms, whispering her profound gratitude. She credited him entirely for her current well-being, causing Helms to flush with embarrassment. The Duke, observing their interaction, narrowed his eyes, wondering what Minerva was truly saying in this situation. The Duke then acknowledged Helms's role in saving Minerva, expressing his sincere gratitude as the Duke of Sunlight. He admitted that if Helms had not been there, he could not imagine what would have happened to his daughter. Helms, however, remained internally aware of the Duke's true, complex feelings. The Duke then shifted the conversation, asking if Helms had forgotten about the attempt to abduct Minerva. Helms, calmly sipping his tea, affirmed his intent to kill the culprit, but emphasized the need to gather crucial information first. He implied that the Duke, too, would want to know the true identity of the one who targeted Minerva. The Duke let out a booming laugh, declaring it was not such a big deal, yet he admitted to being envious of Helms's passionate spirit. He then playfully called Helms a carefree Duke. Minerva, still concerned, then asked Helms if the recent incidents were connected to her abduction. Helms, after a moment, agreed that there was likely a connection, though the full extent was not yet clear. The Duke speculated that the culprits were either numerous or highly skilled. Helms, with a determined glint in his eyes, vowed to absolutely kill the mastermind if he found them, and wondered if there had been anyone else involved at the time of the incident. He continued his conversation with Duke Sunlight, who inquired about any other information regarding the culprits. The Duke suggested that if children were being abducted, it might be better to disclose information to the students for self-defense. Helms recalled a female sword user among the culprits, noting her unusual technique. He pondered if sword user was a job class that didn't exist in the game. His thoughts confirmed that Duke Sunlight's information about the abduction largely aligned with what he had heard at school. The Duke then revealed that Helms had been captured because he possessed magic abilities, and that a list of magic users had been compiled. Helms questioned if it was truly magic, to which the Duke replied that the reason remained unknown. The Duke expressed uncertainty about the true intentions behind the list, noting the recent abduction had been sudden. He found it peculiar that even students from noble families were being listed, as it made searching for unregistered commoners or nobles in the country difficult. Helms agreed, acknowledging the strangeness of the situation. Duke Sunlight then warned that if the culprit's goal was indeed as described, Helms, with his magic talent, would undoubtedly become a primary target. He sensed a grand, unsettling plan unfolding beneath the surface. Helms, holding a small pastry, listened with a look of deep concern. Manurva, who had been quietly observing the conversation, suddenly interjected, telling both Helms and the Duke not to speak such unpleasant things. She then announced that she had a strange idea. Looking earnest and slightly flushed, she explained her idea. Since she might be targeted again, it would be better if she and Helms stayed together. Her proposal caught both Helms and the Duke by surprise. Manurva, however, maintained a confident smile as she elaborated, stating it was a simple idea. If they went out together, they could deal with any hidden threats as a pair. The Duke stroked his mustache, pondering her words. Duke Sunlight, now with a knowing smile, agreed with Minerva's logic, stating that Helms was strong enough to protect her, and she herself could use magic. He concluded that they could support each other, and there was no reason to believe there was any deeper connection behind her idea. Helms and Minerva looked up at him, listening intently. Suddenly, Duke Sunlight's expression turned stern, and he vehemently opposed the idea, declaring he would not allow Minerva to go out with a man of a different age and status, nor would he pay for any damages to her reputation. Helms, equally agitated, also voiced his strong opposition, stating that if they were together, the risk of them becoming a couple would increase, and he refused to lose his freedom. Minerva, looking visibly distressed, asked if she was a nuisance to Helms. He, flustered, tried to calm her, insisting he hadn't meant that. Meanwhile, Artemis, observing the unfolding drama, wondered internally if it would be better if she were the one with Helms, not Minerva. Still reeling from the implications of the abduction, Minerva turned to Helms, her expression earnest. She confessed her deep concern for his safety, especially given his unique magical abilities, and proposed that they remain together, believing it would offer mutual protection. Helms, caught off guard by her directness and the weight of her words, could only utter her name in a flustered tone. As Helms processed Minerva's words, Duke Sunlight interjected forcefully, his face contorted in a mix of exasperation and determination. He dismissed Minerva's concerns about the opposition, declaring that he understood her feelings but had already made a decision. With a proud, almost tearful expression, he proclaimed Helms a rare and exceptional young man, stating his intention to personally entrust Minerva's protection to him. Helms could only stare in wide-eyed shock, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple as the Duke's pronouncement echoed. His internal turmoil only deepened as Helms silently cursed the Duke, thinking how terrible the old man was and how, for the first time since his reincarnation, he felt an urge to punch his own father. Meanwhile, Minerva, oblivious to Helms's distress, beamed with satisfaction. She announced that her proposal had been accepted, which would undoubtedly increase the time she spent with Helms. Acknowledging the crime of her request, she playfully asked him to accompany her on outings sometimes. Helms, utterly defeated, slumped forward, while Artemis, observing from a distance, wore a subtle, knowing smile. Helms, the Duke's son, was known for his exceptional talent at the academy, yet he always seemed to hold himself back, appearing bored. He never truly looked at Minerva, and he showed no interest in the affections of women, even when they openly admired him. Minerva, observing him, felt a strange sense of detachment from him since their first encounter. She continued to reflect on his nature, perceiving him as a genius who disliked being part of a crowd, someone she always expected to eventually see with a pained expression. Despite the numerous opportunities to meet at noble parties, he maintained a superficial politeness with everyone, never truly engaging. He would offer a formal bow, but his eyes remained distant, as if his true self was elsewhere. Minerva often wondered why Helms wore such a pained expression, why he didn't stand taller despite his immense talent, and why he seemed to have no one by his side. The answer to these questions, she realized, had only recently become clear to her. She understood that he wasn't being aloof out of choice, but was truly holding himself back. Because he possessed a talent far beyond others, he had been isolated since birth, living a life of profound solitude. He was shown practicing magic, conjuring a small, contained whirlwind in his palm. It was at that moment she finally grasped the depth of his loneliness. He had chosen to conform to others, to hide his own abilities, all in an attempt to connect. She observed him in a forest, seemingly alone, while other students were nearby, oblivious to his inner world. Simultaneously, she felt a surge of frustration and regret that she was weaker than him. She resolved to always strive for excellence, believing that as a noble with high magical aptitude, she might be able to bridge the gap and reach him in his loneliness. Elsewhere, the real-world protagonist appeared to be enjoying life to the fullest, his dark feelings having vanished as if by magic, replaced by a bright and cheerful demeanor. Fran, the maid, attended to him, wiping his face with a cloth. Back in the game world, Minerva observed Helms standing under a magical shower, reflecting that something about him, though she couldn't quite pinpoint what, had gradually shifted her interest from rivalry to friendship with every conversation they shared. Then, She recalled the countless times Helms had come to her aid when she was powerless and defenseless. This memory made her heart pound with something more profound than mere regret. She saw him as the prince from her favorite picture book, the one she had yearned for as a young girl. She found herself smiling, a happy feeling washing over her just by remembering him. Helms, beside her, offered a gentle, almost shy smile. She mused internally that these feelings must surely be something more. Meanwhile, Helms remained composed, sipping his tea, seemingly unaware of the emotional turmoil brewing within her. Later, at a tea party, Helms found himself amidst boisterous laughter from Duke Sunlight and another noble, feeling utterly out of place. He observed their lively conversation, realizing he had no part in it. Manurva continued to stare intently at Helms, prompting him to ask if there was something on his face. She quickly denied it, but he found himself completely unable to decipher her true intentions. As the tea party drew to a close, Duke Sunlight announced that it was time to depart for the royal palace, where he had an appointment, advising everyone to be careful. Helms, relieved, thought to himself that it was finally over. To his surprise, he learned they would meet again at the academy. As Manurva, Fran, and the other students departed, Helms pondered the significant mental damage he would suffer if he were to be hated, resolving to maintain a safe distance from them. A week later, on a Sunday, Helms found himself being relentlessly pursued by Manurva and the other students, feeling as though he was being dragged around against his will. Manurva, however, simply told him not to worry about her and to just tolerate her company sometimes. As he walked away from the academy gates, Helms reflected that perhaps he should be grateful for the attention, despite his discomfort. Suddenly, Artemis called out to him, apologizing for making him wait. He quickly retorted that no one had been waiting for her. She then clarified that she had just arrived, prompting a visible sigh of relief from Helms. She listened as Helms remarked that despite being mere classmates, their conversation felt like that of a couple. He then confirmed their destination for the day, the beginner dungeon. She simply affirmed his words. She then inquired if this expedition was a training session similar to the Whispering Corridor. Helms, averting his gaze, explained that he had a specific objective within that dungeon and urged her to hasten. With a determined glint in her eyes, Artemis declared that they might discover traces of her father there. His urgency stemmed from a desire to improve his own capabilities. Helms reviewed his personal status screen, which detailed his gender, age of 15, and current level of 18. His core attributes, strength, vitality, agility, and intelligence, all stood at 61. His magical proficiencies varied, with fire at intermediate level 21, while water, wind, earth, holy, and dark magic were all at intermediate level 16. His swordsmanship was at beginner level 38, academics at 36, and his charm, notably, at 100. His objective for the day was clear, to raise his proficiency. Following his review, they arrived at the dungeon's entrance. He observed that its appearance was identical to that of the Whispering Corridor, a place known for its horror-themed labyrinth concept. Together, they stepped into the dimly lit, arched passageway. As they ventured deeper, the dungeon transformed, revealing itself as a vast, natural forest, with shafts of light piercing through the dense canopy. Helms explained that this particular dungeon was designed with a great natural environment as its motif. Artemis, gazing around in wonder, exclaimed that it was indeed a forest. Continuing their exploration, Helms instructed Artemis to remain close to him. She responded with a cheerful affirmation, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and a hint of apprehension. As they proceeded, Artemis inquired if he had already assessed this dungeon. He confirmed his familiarity with the area, noting that the monster population here was exceptionally high. Suddenly, a rustling in the undergrowth signaled an unexpected and immediate encounter. He turned to her, asking if she possessed a weapon. She hesitantly confirmed she did, but confessed her feelings of weakness. He offered reassurance, telling her that everything would be fine. He then explained that this particular dungeon prioritized the collective strength of groups over individual prowess. Artemis looked startled, clutching her dagger, as Helms began to manifest a small, glowing orb of magic in his hand, preparing for the impending confrontation. Before them, a terrifying horde of grotesque, animalistic monsters, with sharp teeth and glowing eyes, surged forward. Artemis gasped in sheer shock and fear, overwhelmed by their sheer numbers. She found herself surrounded, the grotesque forms of numerous monsters closing in from every direction, their sheer numbers overwhelming her with terror. Yet, beside her, Helms remained calm, his gaze fixed on the approaching horde as he prepared for the inevitable clash. As the monsters surged forward, he explained to a surprised Artemis that the creatures in this particular dungeon revived quickly, making it an ideal place to gain proficiency for intermediate levels, far more efficient than they had initially believed. He added that even a novice at level 1 could likely defeat them with ease. Despite her initial shock, she extended her arm, channeling her magical energy. With a focused declaration, she unleashed a powerful wind blade, a swirling vortex of air that tore through the approaching enemies. Artemis gasped in delight, exclaiming that she had succeeded. She then looked at her hand in disbelief, questioning if she had truly defeated a monster with a single blow. Helms, observing her, confirmed her success, praising her for her accomplishment. Artemis, with a confident smile, unleashed her wind blade spell, a swirling vortex of air. Helms observed her technique, complimenting her natural talent. She beamed, declaring her newfound confidence and determination to push herself further. As the training continued, Artemis pressed her attack, her wind blade still active, while Helms moved to meet her, ready to counter. Moments later, Artemis lay on the ground, utterly exhausted, her magical energy completely depleted. Helms approached her, noting that emptying one's magic reserves inevitably leads to such fatigue. Still recovering, Artemis expressed her awe at Helms's incredible performance in their previous battle. She acknowledged the Lunicilia ducal family's reputation for talent, but wondered what specific abilities he possessed. He simply asked what she meant. She explained that despite her own magical prowess, she couldn't match his intensity. She then earnestly asked how she could become as strong as him. Helms, looking at her intently, simply called her name. Artemis, with unwavering resolve, declared her desire to become strong like him. He responded that perhaps she could achieve it now. Helms reflected that Artemis's path, supporting her father in dangerous solo dungeon explorations, was fundamentally different from his own pursuit of freedom. He then suggested that dungeon training was his recommendation for her. He explained that while fighting monsters was life-threatening, the rewards were experience and proficiency. Artemis acknowledged his words, understanding the path he laid out. He then advised her that once she became stronger, she should learn to control her own power. With renewed determination, Artemis declared that she would challenge herself with dungeon training. Helms offered his assistance, telling her to feel free to invite him to dungeon explorations if she needed help. She readily agreed, and he mused that he was also interested in witnessing her growth beyond his own. Artemis thanked him, promising to become strong. Helms then suggested they try out her sword skills right away. She agreed, her excitement evident as she looked forward to her development. She moved with renewed vigor, confronting a grotesque, insectoid monster. "Helms, sir, please leave this monster to me," she declared, determined to prove her strength. As she fought, Helms observed her technique. He noted that while her swordsmanship might still be inferior to Manurva's, she had been trained by an adventurer father, and her skill was undeniably excellent. He also realized that despite her father's reputation, no trace of him had ever been found. Moments later, they continued their journey, and Helms pointed ahead. "We've come quite far into the depths," he remarked. "The boss area should be visible soon." She acknowledged his words, a hint of anticipation in her expression. They soon arrived at a vast, circular clearing, dominated by an intricate magic circle etched into the ground. At its center lay a colossal, unconscious beast, its form vaguely lupin. She gasped, startled by the sight. She stared at the creature, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What is that?" she whispered. Helms calmly identified it. "That is a lycanthrope, the boss of the beginner dungeon." Her surprise was evident as she repeated, "A boss." He explained that dungeons contain powerful individuals, far stronger than the regular monsters encountered along the way. She then asked, her voice tinged with apprehension, "So, can you defeat such a monster, Helms, sir?" He met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "Of course I can." He then instructed her to observe closely. "Watch me," he said, a confident smile gracing his lips. "I shall present you with its head, Artemis." He further clarified that boss monsters were restricted to their designated area and could not leave it, as indicated by a glowing diagram that appeared before them. As he spoke, the colossal lycanthrope began to stir, its massive form slowly rising from the ground. It let out a low, guttural growl, its eyes fixing on Helms. Helms looked up at the towering beast, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "It's huge," he mused, unfazed by its intimidating presence. The lycanthrope snarled, its fangs bared. Helms, drawing his sword with a confident clang, assured Artemis, "Don't worry, I won't let it get away." His eyes gleamed with determination as he prepared to face the beast. With his sword now fully drawn, Helms met the lycanthrope's furious roar with a confident, almost playful smirk. He held a small, round object in his left hand, his eyes gleaming as he declared the battle's commencement. Helms deftly dodged a massive claw attack from the lycanthrope, moving with incredible speed as he prepared to counter. His eyes remained sharp, assessing the beast. He continued his agile movements, observing the lycanthrope's patterns. He noted that its attacks were unchanged from the game, but its raw stats were significantly higher, particularly its speed, making it a formidable close combat opponent. He realized that any misjudgment of its swiftness would lead to his swift defeat. The lycanthrope's powerful claw struck his sword, forcing him back. He grimaced, acknowledging the clear disadvantage he faced. Yet, he maintained a determined smile, declaring his preference for challenges where his opponent held a slight edge. He deftly dodged another powerful strike, flipping through the air as the lycanthrope lunged again, its speed visibly increasing. He continued to evade, noting that despite the lycanthrope's high speed, its attacks remained simple and predictable. He concluded that in this decisive combat style, agility was paramount. He considered that immense attack power was meaningless if he could not land a decisive blow to take down his opponent. He mused that those who relentlessly pursued speed would ultimately prevail, even if their individual strikes inflicted less damage. He needed to find a way to generate more power to defeat it quickly. He acknowledged the lycanthrope's superior speed, realizing he needed a different approach, something beyond a mere counter. Suddenly, a new idea sparked in his mind. He decided to attempt a risky maneuver, utilizing wind magic for enhanced movement, a technique that had previously failed him. He wondered if he could master it now, in the heat of a real battle. He concentrated, understanding that merely storing magic was insufficient. He needed to visualize himself becoming the missile. The lycanthrope roared, lunging directly at him. With an explosive burst of speed, he transformed into a living projectile, striking the lycanthrope with immense force and tearing through its body. He lunged forward, a blur of motion, his body transformed into a living projectile by the force of his newly applied magic. The sheer velocity of his attack tore through the air, leaving streaks of raw power in its wake. The blow connected with devastating force, sending the lycanthrope reeling back, its eyes wide with shock and pain. As the creature stumbled, he stood firm, a confident smile gracing his lips. He mused that this new technique, which allowed him to become the missile itself, might be aptly named acceleration magic. The lycanthrope lay seemingly defeated on the ground. However, the beast was not yet defeated. With a guttural roar, it lunged back, its massive claws extended, attempting to tear into him. He deftly dodged the renewed assault, finding exhilaration in the challenge. He reflected that overcoming such adversity was the true essence of life's awakening, especially when it involved developing new magic not found within the confines of the game. The lycanthrope roared in impotent rage, its attacks consistently missing their mark as he moved with impossible speed. With a final burst of speed, he declared his technique, acceleration, as he delivered the decisive strike, leaving the lycanthrope collapsing behind him. The lycanthrope lay defeated, its massive form motionless on the ground. From a distance, Artemis watched in awe, exclaiming how amazing his power was and confirming that the battle had finally concluded. Artemis, beaming with admiration, praised Helms for his incredible strength, marveling at his ability to defeat such a formidable monster. He accepted her praise with a slight smile. He then explained his technique, revealing that he had used wind magic from his shoes to propel himself forward, ensuring the attack was swift and painless. Artemis's father, Asta, observed Helms with a keen, almost paternal interest, remarking on his impressive abilities. He suggested that Helms's name would soon stand alongside other great adventurers, bringing glory as a human. As they walked away, Artemis mentioned that her father's name was not in Helms's memories. He confirmed he hadn't known him, but acknowledged that Asta must have been a very famous person. Helms expressed his satisfaction with Artemis's progress. She affirmed her determination to continue searching for her father and to become as strong as Helms. A status screen displayed Helms's current statistics. Male, 15 years old, level 22, with STR, VIT, AGI, and INT all at 73. His magic proficiency in fire, water, wind, earth, holy, and dark was all at intermediate level 23, while his swordsmanship was beginner level 41, academics 36, and charm 100. Artemis stood beside him, observing the details. Artemis collapsed, utterly exhausted, having finally emerged from the dungeon. Helms noted her fatigue, but praised her efforts, observing that her magic power had significantly increased in the latter half of their journey, and her combat speed and sharpness had changed considerably. He concluded that her high combat value indicated she was definitely a speed type, and she had grown stronger since entering the dungeon. Artemis, wide-eyed, slowly processed the realization of her own newfound strength. She enthusiastically declared her intention to work hard, even to the point of bursting her chest, to match Helms's expectations. He encouraged her, looking slightly flustered by her intense display. Helms suggested they return to town, and she readily agreed. He then mused about having things he wanted to try before the next test, expressing his excitement. May had passed, and the protagonist reflected that it had taken half a month, but his preparations were finally taking shape. He declared his preparations complete, ready for the grade-level exam, which he knew was the first common event in the world of Lovely Sorcerer. The player understood that common events were crucial story points that had to be cleared regardless of the chosen character route. While affection for heroines usually increased through normal interactions, these common events allowed the protagonist to specifically raise affection for a particular heroine. He further elaborated on the exam structure. It consisted of 3 parts: written, magic, and swordsmanship. The individual and overall scores would determine the affection ranking for each heroine. For Manurva, the condition was to be in the top 3 overall, while Artemis and 2 other heroines required high scores to gain affection. Other results would increase affection for other heroines. Returning to his own preparations, Helms diligently practiced his swordsmanship. He had spent the past month researching and experimenting to refine his combat techniques, aiming to achieve significant results and earn recognition. He then declared his intention to play a lot, much to Fran's apparent surprise. Soon after, Manurva greeted him, noting his confident appearance and readiness for the exam. Helms held a keen marked eye. He smiled confidently, stating that he expected Manurva, as the main heroine, to show results beyond his imagination. He then thought that today would be the day he, a mere mob character, would turn everything into his own seed for growth. Manurva looked on, seemingly surprised by his intensity. Manurva, spurred by his words, declared with a determined expression that she would pull out all the stops. Helms mused that this was completely due to the influence of hot-bloodedness. A clock on the wall marked the time as a voice announced the start of the written exam. As he began the written exam, Helms felt a strange sensation. He wondered if it was a status correction from his previous life's memories or simply Helms's inherent high academic ability, but concluded that it felt like too much for either explanation alone. He had completed the entire exam in a mere 10 minutes, with 40 minutes still remaining. He sighed, wishing there was a similar status correction in his current life, and considered reviewing for the next exam. Having completed the written exam, he now moves towards the stage as Teresia announces the next phase, the magic exam, to be held in the first training ground. Other students also begin to gather. He then observes the magic circle on the stage, contemplating the nature of the magic exam. He wonders if it will involve target practice with magic or perhaps elementary magic chants. As the exam begins, Artemis steps forward, demonstrating her prowess by conjuring powerful flames. Helms watches, surprised by her skill, while Teresia remarks on the general level of student ability, noting that it is common for students not to have properly raised their levels. She continues her display, effortlessly casting a barrage of elemental spells, fire, water, wind, and earth, showcasing a remarkable mastery of magic. Her performance is captivating, solidifying her reputation as a formidable, lovely sorcerer, and one of the main heroines, known by her true name, Leorandina. Surrounded by awestruck students, she inquires about the effectiveness of her reinforcement magic. The other students marvel at her talent, noting that her fame as a magic prodigy has spread far beyond their borders, and that she possesses the rare talent of a magic user, unofficially dubbed the Magic Apostle. Helms continues to observe her, while Teresia explains that Artemis possesses a rare divine aptitude for all 4 basic magic attributes, making her an unprecedented figure in history. He then realizes that his own fire magic, even a basic chant, has significantly increased in power, though the concept of levels remains unclear to him. Teresia then calls Helms von Lunicelia to the stage. He responds, acknowledging that he, like Artemis, is an explorer type, implying a shared, unique aptitude. As he ascends the steps, students whisper amongst themselves, questioning if he truly possesses aptitude for all attributes like Artemis, and recalling his previous, seemingly effortless, duel with Manurva. Standing ready on the stage, he prepares to begin, focusing his thoughts on the advantage of possessing multiple magic attributes, which he believes will serve him well in this examination designed to confirm the power and aptitude of magic. He prepared for his turn, recalling that even his teacher, Teresia, had garnered significant attention during her own exam for mastering 2 magic attributes. He knew that simply being able to wield 2 was impressive, but he was about to demonstrate something far beyond that. As he stepped forward, Helms unleashed his magic, and to the astonishment of all, multiple elemental spheres, fire, wind, earth, and water, swirled around him simultaneously, each radiating its distinct energy. He continued to manifest the different magic types, reflecting on the immense effort it had taken him to acquire this unique, game-breaking skill. He knew that, normally, casting multiple spells at once was considered impossible. He understood that magic was fundamentally designed for single-instance activation, making parallel casting incredibly difficult to operate and control. Yet, he had overcome that limitation. He also considered his dark magic, which he usually omitted from such displays. With a focused expression, he activated his parallel magic, extending his hand as dark, shadowy tendrils erupted from him, intertwining with the already swirling elemental energies. The dark magic, a powerful skill known as reinforcement, surged forward, a torrent of destructive energy that merged with the other elements, creating a chaotic, overwhelming force. The sheer power of reinforcement shattered the surrounding environment, causing the very ground and structures to crack and crumble. Helms looked on in wide-eyed surprise, realizing he had overdone it, and quickly offered an apology as the other students and Duke Sunlight reacted with a mixture of shock and terror at the unexpected devastation. Within a grand, cavernous hall, a multitude of students gathered, their gazes fixed upon a raised platform. At its center stood Helms, surrounded by several other students, including Manurva and Artemis, as the words of the chapter title, "I'm a mob, but I'm aiming for the strongest," echoed the ambition of the moment. Following the display of his overwhelming power, Helms wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, a slight, nervous smile on his face. He mused internally that he might have overdone it, acknowledging the unexpected intensity of his own actions. Manurva, standing beside him, questioned the nature of his recent display, asking what exactly had just transpired. Helms explained that it was likely a form of parallel activation magic, a world-first technique that few, if any, could truly master. Below, the other students murmured in astonishment, wondering how much magic he had poured into the spell and if such power was even possible. With the magical aptitude test concluded, Helms calmly walked forward, leaving the remaining details to the teachers and examiners. He instructed everyone to proceed to the next stage of the assessment. As he moved towards the next examination area, two students, student male 2 and student female 2, observed him commenting on his performance. Helms, however, was preoccupied with his own thoughts, noting that this test, too, seemed to mirror the game's structure. The next challenge was the sword fighting examination, where students were to spar against an active knight. Trainer Butler 1 engaged student male 2 in a fierce exchange of blows, their blades clashing with precision and speed, while Helms watched intently from the sidelines. Trainer Butler 1 then addressed Helms and student male 2, explaining that while the game had level limitations, knights were fixed at level 30. He instructed them to record their class and name in order. Helms acknowledged the instructions, understanding the system's inherent limitations. As Helms diligently filled out his paperwork, he reflected on his own current level and the month he had spent tirelessly grinding in dungeons to raise his stats. He realized with certainty that this preparation would allow him to overturn events within the game. His excitement grew as he realized this was not merely a test, but an incredible opportunity to observe the sword techniques of active knights up close. Student male 2, standing nearby, cast a glance of annoyance in his direction. The other students, including student male 2, student female 2, student male 3, and student female 4, exchanged frustrated glances, clearly annoyed by Helms's presence and his seemingly oblivious enthusiasm. Helms, however, simply looked on, confused by their reactions. He observed a group of students, their whispers carrying across the hall. One student, a young man with a confident smirk, openly mocked someone as a dropout. The others murmured about a girl being too popular in a negative sense, their words laced with disdain. The group, led by the same smirking student, then confronted someone directly, their voices rising in agitation. They questioned how this individual could have possibly passed the magic exam, given their supposed zero aptitude, demanding to know what connections allowed them entry into the Magic Academy. He realized they were speaking of Artemis von Aster, the Chrysanthemum Princess, a name he recalled from the game's lore. She stood before them, head bowed in dejection. Helms knew that while her family was not of the lowest class, she was infamous for her complete lack of magical ability, a reputation that had always been poor. The students continued their relentless taunts, asserting that Artemis could not use any of the 6 elemental magics, nor even divine magic. They pointed to the attribute measurement device, which confirmed her lack of affinity, stating that despite possessing magical power, she could not activate any spells. They concluded that she would eventually be branded as utterly useless. He observed Artemis, noting that her aptitude was so incredibly low that she was widely believed to be incapable of using magic at all. This was a crucial piece of information he had never encountered in the game's extensive lore. He stepped forward, interrupting the hostile students, and gently asked Artemis if she was all right, inquiring about what had transpired. The other students reacted with visible shock and annoyance at his unexpected intervention. He glared at the students, his expression stern, and commanded them to be silent. He asserted that he was currently questioning Artemis, and they had no business interfering. The smirking student attempted to argue, claiming it was a matter for the Magic Academy. He then asked Artemis if she felt as though she was being looked down upon due to her perceived lack of ability. She confirmed that she had merely stood there, but admitted that despite possessing magical power and aptitude, she truly could not use magic. The smirking student interjected, claiming he had heard that Lady Sarah, Artemis, was simply standing there, implying her passivity. He smiled warmly at Artemis, telling her that being different from ordinary people was not a flaw. He suggested that if they could uncover the explanation for her hidden talent, it would be incredibly interesting, and perhaps that talent could even prove useful to him in the future. However, the student with the smirk burst into mocking laughter, dismissing Helms's words as nonsense. He loudly declared that Artemis was truly useless, unable to even properly wield a sword. Artemis looked up, her expression a mix of surprise and renewed hurt at the cruel insult. She listened as the other students continued their taunts, mocking her inability to use magic despite her aptitude. Helms, however, intervened, declaring that true talent lay in mastering both sword and magic, not in the inability to use either. He then dismissed her tormentors as mere bugs, telling Artemis to come with him, suggesting they might find someone to consult. He then turned his gaze to the primary instigator, student male 1, stating his profound disdain for people like him. Enraged by the insult, student male 1 demanded to know why Helms would defend such a woman, insisting that her fate was already sealed. The other students, student male 2 and student female 2, watched the escalating confrontation with wide, shocked eyes. Ignoring the escalating anger, Helms gently took Artemis's hand, urging her to follow him. She looked up at him, her expression a mix of surprise and uncertainty. As they walked away, leaving the stunned students behind, student male 2 remarked to student female 2 that Helms would likely still achieve superior grades despite his defiant actions. Student male 1 remained fuming, glaring at their retreating figures. Still seething, student male 1 called out to Helms, challenging him to reveal his true talent if he intended to make a fool of him. Helms merely glanced back, his expression calm and almost dismissive. A teacher called out to Helms von Lunacelia, instructing him to take his weapon and ascend to the stage. Helms acknowledged the instruction, realizing it was his turn. Other students observed, with one remarking on the opportunity to observe the low-rank student in action. Responding to the instruction, Helms bowed respectfully to the teacher, apologizing for the delay and requesting a moment to prepare for the final sword examination of the school year. He acknowledged the difficult circumstances. As he prepared, the student who had previously spoken to him approached, greeting him as the Duke's son of Lunacelia. He expressed doubt that Helms could achieve his previous results if he were to fight with full effort. Accepting the challenge, Helms thanked him, acknowledging the honor of fighting a renowned genius. The student, revealing his name as Cookie, declared it a privilege to face a current knight, promising to give his all. With the examination underway, Cookie immediately launched a powerful, sweeping attack, forcing Helms to block with his sword. Helms noted Cookie's impressive speed and strength, realizing he was a formidable opponent. Despite Helms's defense, Cookie pressed his assault, striking from various angles, up, down, right, left, each blow carrying immense force. Helms parried, his expression shifting from surprise to a determined smile. Cookie, observing Helms's defense, decided he no longer needed to hold back, increasing the intensity of his attacks. Helms continued to block, matching the escalating ferocity. Yet, Helms remained steadfast, his movements precise as he deflected Cookie's relentless strikes. Cookie, surprised by Helms's resilience, noted his opponent's impressive skill. Helms, however, was still analyzing, observing Cookie's movements and anticipating his next attack. He saw a pattern, a star shape, in Cookie's footwork and began to read his opponent's muscle movements. As the intense exchange continued, a sudden opening appeared as Cookie's movements momentarily faltered, creating a crucial opportunity for Helms. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, his sword aimed directly at Cookie, who reacted swiftly to block the counterattack. Though Cookie managed to defend, the force of the blow left him visibly strained and surprised. He acknowledged that Helms's strength was far greater than he had anticipated. Cookie, still reeling from the previous exchange, found himself on the defensive. He declared that Helms's current efforts were insufficient, urging him to push further and demonstrate more of his capabilities. Helms, with a calm demeanor, simply gestured, inviting him to continue. His opponent, fueled by a surge of frustration, prepared a powerful overhead strike, his face contorted in a grimace of effort. Helms, however, merely offered a slight smile, remarking that the next phase would prove even more interesting. As Cookie lunged forward with his sword, Helms deftly sidestepped the attack, his movements fluid and precise. He revealed that this was his newly developed unarmed combat style, a technique he had been exploring. He continued to evade Cookie's relentless sword strikes, explaining that the techniques of a knight also encompassed powerful kicks and charges, not solely relying on the blade. Cookie's eyes widened in shock as he processed this revelation. He realized that while unarmed combat had a shorter attack range than a sword, its attack speed was dramatically faster. Helms, observing his opponent's dawning comprehension, internally noted that a single opening was all he would need. In a blur of motion, Helms seized his opportunity, delivering a devastating kick directly to Cookie's midsection. The force of the blow sent his opponent reeling backward. Cookie crashed to the ground, his sword clattering uselessly beside him, his face a mask of disbelief and pain. Helms, already closing the distance, moved in for the decisive strike. Standing over the defeated Cookie, Helms held his sword poised, having effectively disarmed him. He calmly stated that even when an opponent closed the distance, he could still launch a sufficient attack, signaling the end of the match. The teacher, Teresia Bell, observed the scene with a thoughtful expression, then inquired if the examination was now concluded. Helms, looking slightly downcast, admitted he had wished to test his abilities further. Around them, the other students stared in wide-eyed horror and astonishment at the overwhelming display of skill they had just witnessed. After a rigorous training session, Helms bowed respectfully to his opponent, a female student, acknowledging the conclusion of their practice. The air still hummed with the echoes of their efforts. Elsewhere, a male student lay sprawled on the ground, defeated, as another student called for a temporary halt to the sword test, suggesting a medic was needed. He lamented that his opponent's unexpected counter-technique had been too much, feeling his arm was now useless. The female student who had trained with Helms wondered aloud if the trio of defeated students, despite their strength, could truly win against the lovely sorcerer in the actual game. Helms, having recovered, stated he would go check on the others. Meanwhile, the defeated student, Ruriyasu, expressed his frustration, questioning if he would ever be all right after such a loss. Observing the scene from a distance was Artemis. As Helms moved, his gaze fell upon Artemis, who stood with an aura of elegance. Her beautiful silver hair, eyes like ice, and skin as white as snow captivated his attention, leaving him momentarily flustered. This elegant figure was Freya von Winter, the daughter of the Holy Sword Duke Grail von Winter and one of the main heroines of the game. She then approached Helms directly, her expression serious, stating that she had something important to discuss with him, the Duke of Lunacelia. Helms, still reeling from her sudden appearance, tried to explain that he couldn't possibly compete in the previous sword test, but she cut him off. With surprising speed, she demonstrated a new grappling technique, pulling him close and asking what kind of training he had undergone. He was utterly flustered, realizing he was being held by a woman. Holding him firmly, she continued, explaining that relying solely on swordsmanship was not enough, as it left one vulnerable when disarmed. She emphasized the importance of repeatedly practicing other skills. He then clarified that he had indeed incorporated grappling techniques into his training, considering them a form of self-defense. She acknowledged his point, noting that such techniques truly required utilizing an opponent's weight and posture. Freya then made a direct request, asking him to teach her his close-quarters combat skills. She admitted that she had no experience with grappling techniques, despite her family's renowned swordsmanship. Helms, surprised by her earnest plea, listened intently. She explained that her family had risen through swordsmanship, and she possessed absolute confidence in her own blade. Helms acknowledged her statement, finding her condition not unfavorable. Freya continued, stating that while her family's legacy was built on swordsmanship, she had observed Helms's movements during class and wished to learn his unique grappling techniques. Meanwhile, Manurva and another student watched, Manurva expressing surprise at the unfolding conversation. Realizing this was a rare opportunity, Helms, with a bright smile, readily agreed to her request, stating he understood and would gladly accept. His enthusiastic response visibly startled Freya. Overwhelmed with joy and relief, Freya thanked him profusely, her face flushed with happiness. Helms, flustered by her intense gratitude, internally noted that she was showing her lovely sorcerer side. He quickly tried to dismiss her thanks, feeling embarrassed by the display. He then turned his attention to Manurva, asking if she would also like to join them. Manurva, flustered, immediately declined, stating she was nothing like Freya and had nothing to offer. Helms, however, considered her family, the Chrysanthemum Merchant House, known for continuously releasing popular products and acquiring their status through wealth. Manurva confirmed that her family was indeed a merchant house, and a prominent one even in the royal capital. Helms then began to propose a deal. He suggested that if her family prioritized selling items to him, it would benefit their future relationship. He explained that the right to pre-purchase items was a sufficiently attractive merit, prompting Manurva to consider the implications. Helms continued, emphasizing that he would need many things as he leveled up, and he wished to treat her kindly. Furthermore, he could not simply abandon someone who was being praised. Manurva looked down deep in thought. He concluded that the terms of the trade were equal, and the decision ultimately rested with her. Manurva, holding a coin, seemed to be making a firm decision, her thoughts turning to the idea of becoming stronger. She looked up, her eyes wide behind her glasses, and declared her desire to become stronger, not just strong enough to avoid being made a fool of, but truly powerful. Manurva considered her words, acknowledging that her father had taught her some grappling techniques and that adding one more person to her subordinates would not be an issue. In return, she proposed a trade, priority purchasing rights for Helms's future needs. Freya, listening intently, understood the terms. Helms readily agreed to the arrangement, stating his pleasure in the prospect of a mutually beneficial relationship where they could teach each other techniques. Freya, bowing deeply, expressed her gratitude. As the training began, Helms observed Freya's movements, a faint aura of swords surrounding her as she practiced. He noted her progress with a thoughtful hum. He continued to watch, a frown creasing his brow as he reflected on the game's mechanics. Despite being the protagonist of this world, he felt he had accomplished almost nothing in the month and a half since his enrollment, even though there should have been countless opportunities to improve his stats. His thoughts deepened, questioning why his affinity with Helms was so high and why Artemis's father, a major general, was on the list of people he had impressed. He wondered what was truly happening in this world, a world where the main plot seemed to be diverging from the original game, with Minerva's crisis not even occurring. Meanwhile, in a dark, torch-lit alley, a group of masked figures gathered. One of them, a thug with a large sword, grumbled that their results this time were rather meager. The masked leader, a cloaked figure, demanded to know what was wrong, expressing frustration that their previous attempt to lure the young lady of the organization had failed. Another thug added that the guards had been particularly vigilant lately. The leader then questioned if the captured individuals had confessed, stating that it wouldn't matter in the end, as they would likely be killed by the nobles anyway. He concluded, his voice laced with irritation, that this whole situation was truly infuriating. Following the leader's orders, the thugs moved to capture several students, who cried out in fear and struggled against their assailants. One of the thugs, holding a captured student by the collar, sneered that these little brats were not enough. He then ordered his subordinates to take them underground, dismissing the students from the Magic Academy as mere commoners. The school year exams had concluded without incident, ushering in a long-awaited holiday. Helms, brimming with excitement, declared his intention to spend the break delving into the beginner dungeon known as the Forest of Dark Mist. He sought to acquire valuable boss monster items, essential for his continued growth and leveling. Fran, however, appeared exasperated, cautioning him against his reckless enthusiasm. He arrived at his destination, a dense, overgrown jungle, the entrance to the forest of dark mist dungeon. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and exotic foliage. He observed the surroundings, noting the poor visibility within the jungle's depths. This was indeed the forest of dark mist, and he wondered if he would be able to return quickly, a hint of impatience in his thoughts. He then engaged in combat, his sword flashing as he deftly parried the attacks of two agile, leopard-like monsters. His current status was displayed. Helms von Lunacelia, a 15-year-old male, level 30, with impressive stats across the board, strength, vitality, agility, and intelligence all at 97. His magical proficiencies in fire, water, wind, earth, light, and dark were all at intermediate 40, while his swordsmanship stood at intermediate 52. Academics were 97, and his charm was a perfect 100. He had finally located the boss room, a circular platform adorned with intricate, star-like patterns, nestled deep within the jungle's heart. The air around it seemed to hum with a subtle, arcane energy. He stepped inside the dimly lit chamber, the damp earth beneath his boots muffling his steps. The silence was heavy, broken only by the drip of water and his own soft breath. He muttered to himself, anticipating what lay ahead. As he stood ready, the ground trembled, and a massive, serpentine creature, a venom serpent, erupted from the shadows, its scales gleaming menacingly. Helms, far from intimidated, greeted its appearance with a confident smile, eager for the challenge. Helms found himself facing a colossal venom serpent, its immense body coiled and ready to strike. He knew from experience that this creature's attacks would inflict status ailments, making evasion a priority. He mentally confirmed he had antidotes in his inventory, but his primary strategy remained to avoid its strikes as much as possible. As the serpent lunged with a biting attack, Helms observed its movements. He noted that despite its massive size, its actions were somewhat sluggish, giving him a slight advantage in predicting its next move. The creature continued its assault, sweeping its tail and attempting another venomous bite, but Helms deftly dodged each strike. He realized the serpent's attack patterns were identical to those he had encountered in the game, prompting him to consider a new tactic, fire magic. However, he paused, remembering that the serpent possessed magic resistance. He also considered their current location, a forest, which might make widespread fire magic dangerous. He wondered if relying solely on swordsmanship was still the best approach. A new idea sparked within him. What if he infused magic directly into his sword? He believed that by channeling magic through his weapon, he might bypass the serpent's resistance. He began to focus, preparing to execute this innovative technique. With a surge of power, Helm successfully imbued his sword with a radiant glow, a clear sign of the magic taking hold. A triumphant smile spread across his face as he acknowledged his success. Now armed with his enchanted blade, Helms charged forward, realizing that this enchant magic allowed him to effectively use fire magic, even within the confines of the forest. The venom serpent responded with a guttural growl, sensing the shift in his opponent's power. He struck the venom serpent with a powerful blow, his enchanted sword cutting deep. The attack confirmed his theory. The creature's resistance was only to direct magic, not to physical attacks imbued with magical properties. A confident smirk played on his lips. A brilliant realization dawned on Helms. This method allowed him to simultaneously improve both his swordsmanship and his magical proficiency. He concluded that this was the optimal solution for efficient skill progression. However, the venom serpent thrashed violently in response to the unexpected damage, sending debris flying and momentarily catching Helms off guard. He quickly regained his composure, reminding himself to calm down and focus on applying more enchantment magic to his blade. He continued his relentless assault on the venom serpent, his blade glowing with enchanted energy. He resolved to achieve his goal. With a confident stance, he declared that the serpent's renowned speed would be useless against his current strategy. He launched himself into another powerful strike, his enchanted blade cutting through the air towards the serpent. He wondered how many more blows it would take to defeat the creature. He continued his flurry of attacks, striking the massive serpent repeatedly with precise, enchanted blows. As he landed his 10th strike, he acknowledged the serpent's surprising resilience, but then noticed the ground beneath him beginning to crumble from the force of their battle. Evading a retaliatory strike from the serpent, he concluded that the creature was nearing its limit. He prepared to unleash a concentrated magic bullet. With a surge of power, he unleashed the magic bullet, sending a concentrated blast of energy directly towards the monstrous serpent. Helms endures a fiery attack from a monstrous entity, a ring of flames surrounding him. He acknowledges the difficulty of the battle, remarking on how much he has withstood. Moments later, he beams with satisfaction, holding a small, glowing potion. He expresses gratitude for the magic that produced such wonderful drops, including the magic recovery potion. As he runs through a dense, overgrown area, a system notification appears, indicating that he has acquired an item and that the next individual monster will revive in a few minutes. He considers whether he should hunt the surrounding monsters. He continues his relentless pursuit of strength, engaging in a series of battles against various grotesque creatures, his sword flashing with each strike as he grows more powerful. With a surge of power, he unleashes a devastating attack, a massive explosion of energy erupting from his form, obliterating his foe. After the intense combat, he reviews his status screen, noting his updated level and attributes. He observes that it has grown quite dark and realizes he needs to find Fran. A system message confirms he defeated the Great Serpent of Wunum and gained significant experience and drop items. He walks through the academy courtyard, his attention drawn to a cluster of students. He approaches them, wondering aloud what the commotion is about. His eyes widen in shock as he overhears the students' distressed whispers. One female student, her face etched with worry, confirms that something unsettling has happened at the academy, and the name Manurva is mentioned in hushed tones, suggesting she was abducted. He leans in, demanding to know the full story. The female student, visibly shaken, explains that an unknown assailant appeared within the academy grounds and took Manurva. He presses for Manurva's location, but she admits she does not know. His expression hardens, a mix of anger and fierce determination. He cannot believe Manurva was abducted, especially within the supposedly secure magic academy, without the knights or teachers noticing. He resolves to go find her himself. He stood amidst the academy grounds, a sense of urgency in his posture. This unfolding situation, Manurva's abduction, was an unprecedented scenario, entirely outside the parameters of the game he knew. He questioned how he was meant to proceed, how he could possibly track her. He pondered his own capabilities, dismissing the notion that the current protagonist could rescue Manurva. He considered whether he could utilize something akin to the search magic found in other games. A sudden realization sparked in his eyes, and he declared with conviction that he could indeed accomplish the task. With a determined expression, he extended his hand, asserting that if such abilities did not exist within this world, he would simply create them. He reminded himself that he had, after all, created all the parallel activations and magic himself. He began to channel his magic, a luminous orb forming in his palm. He cursed under his breath, desperately hoping Manurva was at least somewhat close. He understood that search magic typically involved connecting one's own senses to the magical flow, spreading it out like sonar to detect a region. He acknowledged that the further the target, the more magic would be consumed, but he had a substantial stock of magic recovery items, so it posed no issue. He focused intently, pouring his magic outward from his core, intending to expand its reach even wider. The magical energy surged, creating a vast, intricate network that spread across the landscape. The magical sonar continued its expansion, revealing a detailed, almost architectural representation of the city structures. It meticulously mapped the intricate layout of buildings and streets, indicating a wide-ranging and precise scan. He observed the expanding magical field, noting the spatial distortions and the faint, human-like figures that seemed connected to something further below. He wondered if it was a dungeon or some other subterranean area. His eyes snapped open, filled with fierce determination. He had found something. He declared with certainty that he had located her. The intense combat continued as Helms found himself assailed from multiple directions. A dual swordsman descended from above, blades flashing, while a spear wielder thrust upwards from below, forcing him to parry a flurry of attacks. Manurva, fighting nearby, observed the chaotic engagement. He skillfully parried the incoming blows, his expression grim. The dual swordsman, however, seemed unfazed, questioning if Helms was truly a duke's son, implying a lack of ferocity. Moments later, Helms narrowly dodged a sweeping axe attack, the force of the blow shaking the ground where he had stood. The arena was now swarming with even more opponents, each launching relentless assaults, leaving him little room to maneuver. As the battle intensified, Manurva observed the sheer number of combatants, noting their coordinated attacks and surprisingly strong killing intent for what appeared to be mere training dummies. She realized their reflexes were far from ordinary. Helms found himself cornered, surrounded by a multitude of blades and weapons. Manurva, seeing his predicament, called out to the opponents, urging them to surrender if they wished to avoid being killed, her voice echoing with a hint of desperation. Despite the overwhelming odds, Helms remained focused. He recognized that the male opponents, in particular, possessed higher levels than himself, making a direct confrontation difficult. He resolved that in this dire situation, his only option was to unleash his dark magic. With a surge of power, he unleashed a swirling vortex of energy, pushing back the surrounding attackers. Manurva watched, stunned, as Helms demonstrated a fundamental principle of combat: eliminate the weakest first. He continued his relentless assault, his movements fluid and precise, avoiding the varied attacks of his opponents. Manurva noted his superior technique and stats, realizing he had the advantage in every aspect. He then declared his intent to handle the situation himself, preparing to unleash a fire magic spell. With a powerful incantation, he conjured a fiery orb, launching a fire magic attack. Manurva, witnessing this, expressed her shock, questioning his decision to use such destructive magic in a confined space. He continued his relentless assault, engaging Manurva, the dual swordsman, and the spear wielder simultaneously. He acknowledged the difficulty of the simulation, realizing that if he continued to hold back, it would be a long and arduous battle. With a surge of resolve, he activated his magic, manifesting a swirling orb of dark energy in one hand and a blazing sphere of fire in the other. Manurva, witnessing this, gasped in surprise, while the dual swordsman braced himself, recognizing the impending danger. The unleashed magic erupted with explosive force, sending Manurva reeling backward through the air and pushing the dual swordsman away with a powerful shockwave. He extended his hand, channeling the raw power, his expression intense as the dark and fiery energies pulsed around him. As the chaos continued, he deftly parried an aerial attack from the spear wielder, deflecting her weapon with his sword. He then blocked a strike from the dual swordsman, acknowledging that he could not simply strike randomly. Each move had to be precise and calculated. He then unleashed a devastating, crescent-shaped sword strike, imbued with magical energy, sweeping it across the ground. He declared the end of the engagement, catching Manurva in its powerful arc and sending her flying. Manurva crashed hard onto the ground, defeated and unable to continue the fight. Her body lay still amidst the dust and debris, a clear sign of his overwhelming power. He stood over the fallen Manurva, who groaned in pain. He calmly told her that if she did not wish to die, she should surrender, assuring her that he would heal her afterward. Nearby, the dual swordsman reacted with a pained exclamation, observing the destruction and the defeat of his comrade. The dual swordsman, battered and bruised, confronted him, acknowledging his skill but demanding that he surrender immediately. He warned that if he did not, his companions would surely die. He dismissed the dual swordsman's plea with a cold, detached expression, stating that the weak die, and that was simply the logic of their world. He added that there was no need for grief, and then prepared for his next move, his stance shifting with renewed intent. He launched himself forward, employing a technique he mentally dubbed the Manurva-style combat, using a burst of magic to propel himself. He aimed to attack the dual swordsman with a powerful, descending strike, his body a blur of motion. With a final, decisive move, he delivered a powerful kick, enhanced by a burst of wind magic, sending the dual swordsman flying backward with immense force. He moved with blinding speed, launching himself into the air for another assault, his internal resolve firm. He would strike one more time. The dual swordsman, though battered, met his charge with a desperate block, his face contorted in a grimace of effort. Below, Helm's hand began to glow with an ominous energy, preparing a new attack. He unleashed a torrent of fire magic, a devastating blast that engulfed the dual swordsman, sending him reeling. The force of the explosion ripped through the simulated arena, leaving Manurva stunned and wide-eyed at the sheer power Helms wielded. Even as his opponent fell, Helms continued his relentless assault, his blade poised for another strike. The dual swordsman collapsed, coughing blood, his body battered and defeated. He conceded the match, declaring it his loss. Helms stood over him, his sword still drawn, his expression calm and unwavering. He acknowledged the defeat, remarking that the outcome was precisely as it should be, a testament to the future. He surveyed the defeated dual swordsman and the stunned Manurva, who watched him with a mixture of shock and awe. Helms mused internally about the nature of his power, acknowledging the overwhelming strength he possessed. The simulation concluded, leaving a trail of destruction and a clear victor. A towering, cloaked figure stood over a fallen Helms, an undeniable aura of overwhelming power emanating from him. He declared that the pressure Helms felt was unmistakable. Helms, startled, wondered if the cloaked figure had been observing him. The figure, identified as Harold, confirmed he had been watching, noting that Helms's plan was a nuisance. Harold then mocked Helms, stating that it was foolish to believe he could sense a detached life force from such a distance. Helms, surrounded by Harold's allies, clenched his jaw in frustration. Helms, his face contorted in anger, told Harold to proceed as he wished. Harold, in turn, declared his intention to capture Helms von Lunacelia, asserting that Helms would serve as a crucial stepping stone for his own grand design. With a sudden burst of resolve, Helms lunged forward, his sword drawn, but Harold moved with impossible speed, deflecting the attack with a blur of motion. The force of Harold's counterattack sent Helms sprawling across the polished floor, his body skidding to a halt. Before Helms could recover, Harold delivered another devastating blow, sending him crashing violently into a nearby wall, a spray of blood marking the impact. Helms now hung suspended by chains, his body bruised and bleeding, while nearby, Manurva and Artemis were similarly bound and gagged, their eyes wide with fear. Helms, gasping, realized the cloak figure was simply too powerful. Harold observed Helms, noting that his stats were far superior, likely exceeding level 40, a truly formidable opponent. Helms struggled against his restraints, acknowledging the grim reality of his situation. Harold questioned if Helms could still rise after such a blow, remarking on his stubborn, beast-like strength. Helms, blood trickling from his mouth, looked towards the empty space where Manurva and Artemis had been, realizing they had been taken. His plan, he thought, was utterly ruined. Turning his back on the captive Helms, Harold stated that Helms did not truly understand the darkness of the world. He then added, with a cryptic tone, that he would save Manurva, implying a deeper, more personal agenda. He effortlessly parried Helms's desperate kick, a casual "oh," escaping his lips as the force of the blow seemed to dissipate against his raised arm. Helms, mid-strike, found his attack utterly nullified. He continued to toy with Helms, remarking on his interesting techniques and demanding to see more of his abilities. Helms, despite being outmatched and with Manurva and Artemis bound nearby, defiantly declared he would show him everything he had. As the dual swordsmen acknowledged Helms's strength, Helms turned to Manurva, urgently instructing her to escape while he bought them time. Manurva, however, vehemently refused, insisting she would not abandon him. She passionately declared that she would not accept a future where Helms sacrificed himself for her. She refused to flee, stating that regardless of why she was kidnapped, this time, she would be the one to save him. Her resolve ignited. Manurva began to glow with an intense golden aura, a power Helms immediately recognized as something entirely new and unexpected, questioning if such magic had ever existed within the game's lore.